the meeting more than anybody else, but our thoughts go out to Councillor Wepper, who has had an operation, and we wish you a speedy recovery, Janet. I do want to say that to all those who are watching live streaming, and I understand there's a number of you, that all the presentations are online, so you can follow the presentations that we're discussing today. I want to welcome councillors and also members of the public and our staff, our highly thought of staff, and in particular the members of the public. We've got some regulars who come quite often now, and a special welcome to you all. First item on the agenda is a call for apologies. I have one from Councillor Okawa Tate. Do I have any other apologies?
Your Worship, for a late arrival, she's got a speaking engagement.
Thank you.
And Councillor Wepper.
And Councillor Wepper. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Donaldson and Councillor Gould. I'm sure, Councillor Gould, you'll move that the apologies be accepted? Will you move that the apologies be accepted? Good.
Another apology.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just apology, Mr. Chairman. At 10 o'clock, I just have to go for half an hour. We've got a farewell morning tea for Stuart Burns.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Half an hour.
Wonderful. Just make sure, like me, I've just turned off my cell phone. So it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Donaldson, that the apologies from Merepeka Raukawa Tate, Councillor Wepper, and the Mayor for lateness, and the fact that Councillor Maxwell will leave the meeting for about half an hour. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Anyone got a declaration of interest? You see the reasoning if you need to declare an interest. There appears to be none. Okay, we'll move on to notifications of any urgent business for consideration. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just I'm seeking reassurance that, according to the today's newspaper, we've spent $5,000 seeking a legal opinion on yellow and black signs around the place. I'm just hopeful that this is the last of the money that we're going to spend on seeking these legal opinions.
That question, Councillor Bentley, we have got it in continuing action, and I think maybe we could raise that when the appropriate staff members here to answer those types of questions. I know these other people want to ask some questions as well. Thank you.
Councillors, if I can just make a couple of introductory comments to this presentation. You'll recall that the material largely has already been presented to you in summary form. At the beginning of the last financial year, we had some quite demanding parameters set within the annual plan which we were to meet. You will also recall that midway through the year we identified the potential for some financial variances from expectations, which you then asked that we address. And by the end of the year, we not only had addressed those variances, but in fact exceeded expectations with regards to cost management, which allowed for quite a favourable outcome at the end of the year, which will be covered. I've asked the Chief Financial Officer, though, in saying this, to address some of the comments that have actually been made publicly about this organisation's financial performance and management. The reason for this is that I'm concerned that these comments actually cast some doubt as to the professionalism of the financial management of this organisation, which I believe is inappropriate. So what I've asked the Chief Financial Officer to do is to actually address directly the concerns that have been put into the public arena with regards to debt levels, performance and so on. And so these matters are actually for the public record within this meeting.
Mr. Chief Executive Officer, because there is general concern being expressed out there in the community and an impression or a perception that this council is out of control with its debt and its debt levels. I did have a look as chair at the long-term plan last night and the annual report, and certainly the indications are that we're way ahead of target and that the debt retirement plan we have is in action. And I'll just draw council's attention to this, which is in your pack that you were sent out, and certainly some very positive measures out there. Thomas, we'll wait for Thomas to make his presentation, and any questions will come through the chair. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the representations made around our finances. And what I'm going to focus on is actually around our levels of debt, because the levels of debt ultimately is a key indicator of how this organisation is performing financially. Now, what this graph represents, sorry guys, you want me to go on the inside? What this graph represents is the blue lines are our historical debt from 2008 through to 2015. So that's our actual debt. And what you'll notice up here is that I've put a bit of a trend line up in here. The red line is our debt limit and our debt ceiling. And our debt ceiling is set to 175% of our income. So you'll see back in 2008, we had about 80 million of debt, and we had a capacity of about 180, 190 million. So we had a lot of headroom to borrow based on our limits. And over that time, our debt increased significantly. So between 2008 and 2013, our debt doubled. And as you can see, our headroom absolutely shrunk with regards to the council's ability to borrow into the future. At point B, which is 2015, you'll see that we had an election during the 2014 year, and the 2014 was really a continuation of the previous financial management. So the annual plan had been set. It had been set with a $4.6 million deficit. There were inherent issues within our finances as well that came through during that year, and that was really reflective of the financial result that we had for 2014. During the 2014 year, we had the election, we had the new council come on board, we implemented a new financial framework, and the 2015 annual plan, so that's the year that we've just completed, was a significant turnaround from where we were. So we understood our finances quite clearly. So we removed $8.3 million worth of operating costs out of the budget. We constrained our capital spend to make sure that we lived within our needs. Now, the important thing to notice is that if we had not have done that as an organisation, you can see where the trend line was going. At B, we actually would have hit our cap, not only the year that's just been, or in this financial year, if we had not have changed our behaviours and our financial management, the things that we did 2 years ago. And the 2015 year is the first year that really reflects the change in financial management of this organisation. Now, where point C is, that's the first year of the LTP. So, there's an assertion there that our level of debt is unsustainable. Our level of debt climbed significantly in the early part of 2000s. However, you can see with regards to where our LTP sits, and I've included the airport debt in there as well, so it is our total debt, that we have significant capacity to borrow and respond, and we don't actually get close to that limit in the next 10 years or into the foreseeable future. One of the other things that's come about is that, and I'll use the words being used, vanity projects are driving our debt. I think that's actually not the case at all. If you look at the graph here, 2019, 20 other years where our debt increases significantly. And there's two projects that are driving that. Rotorua Road and Sewage and exiting the forest of the land treatment system. Those two projects sit in 2019 and 2020, $18 million each year. That's driving the increase in our debt in that year. And as you can see, once that projects are completed, it tails off and reduces towards the remainder of the 10 years. And you can see the borrowing capacity that we're building into the future to be able to respond to the community's future needs. So I think the key is, there is no hidden debt. $167.5 million is our total debt. I think in the past there has been confusion around what our debt was, and that was around how it was appropriate. Was it the airport driving our debt? We had things called self-funding accounts that were confusing the situation. We've stripped all that out. This is our total debt. There is nothing hidden. That includes the airport, that includes all of council's operations. The second one is our debt is sustainable. We're not at our cap. We've got borrowing capacity. We're not projected to go over our cap into the future. If that was the case, in our LTP, the auditors actually would have highlighted that there was an issue in our audit opinion, and they did not. I think the other one is we as an organisation, and councillors in particular, have a much better understanding of our finances than where we previously were. So 2 years ago, PricewaterhouseCoopers came in, undertook a review with regards to the financial information that was being provided and the decisions that were being made. We've significantly changed there. We've peeled back the layers to really provide clear information on our finances, what the impacts are of decisions, and provide a strategic view of where we are going, where we are and where we are going. With regards to this year, we have ended the year within our approved funding. So we plan to borrow $4.2 million. Instead, we've repaid debt. So we are, cash-wise, $5.9 million better off than we thought when we set the plan for this year. Our operating result is on budget. There is no blowout. So we spent what we said we were going to do. So we have reduced revenues, however, we've reduced our expenditure to compensate. The key thing is, though, is that the annual report is being impacted by asset write-offs, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. However, this is being offset by asset revaluations. The key here is that these write-offs are non-cash and do not have a cash impact on this year's result. So with regards to the 2015 annual report, so this is the first year post the financial review. Again, $8.3 million worth of operating costs were removed from the budget in this year. It's pleasing that the operating result is on budget, and we have not borrowed to fund our operating costs. And if I go back a couple of years, one of the drivers when we had this increase in those early years was the fact that our services were underfunded and we were borrowing to fund operating costs. This is not the case anymore. From a capital expenditure point of view, our capital revenues are down. So part of that is the T-Rex project, which was programmed to get significant NFE funding. Because that project has moved as fast as planned, we haven't received those revenues, but we also haven't spent the money. So with regards to living in our means, we've received less revenue, we've spent less, and as a result, we have ended the year $5.9 million better off. So rather than borrowing $4.2 million, we ended the year with $1.7 million of cash on hand, $1.2 million of which we used to retire debt. The other $500,000 we've held to increase our working capital. So I showed you this last couple of weeks ago. I think it's just important again to just work through it again to get some understanding. So what I've done here is you take the financial statements and you turn it into a simple cash flow statement. And so at the top here, if we look at our budget, we were planning on achieving $102 million worth of revenue, spending $112, and we're going to have an operating deficit of $10.5 million. Now, we haven't included the capital subsidies in there. The capital subsidies are further down. If you take that operating deficit, because there are non-cash items in there, that's not the true cash position. We're not saying that we're running at a $10 million cash deficit. That's not the case at all. That's an accounting deficit. If I take back the expenditure in our operating expenditure, that's non-cash, mainly depreciation, you get to effectively a cash position from operations. So what we're saying is, with regards to the budget, we were, that's that figure there, when I take back off depreciation, we were going to get $16.8 million of cash from our operations, which would be available to fund capital expenditure. On top of that, we get capital subsidy. So in the year, we were planning on having $26.3 million of funding available for our capital expenditure, and we were projected to spend 30.5. So we were going to borrow 4.2 to fund the difference. The reality was, it was different. So our operating revenue was down, so it's 2.7 million down. However, we've reduced our operating expenditure appropriately as well. So from an operating deficit point of view, $19,000 difference. So we're effectively on budget. We add back the depreciation, so the actual depreciation was a little bit less than what we budgeted. So rather than generating $16.8 million of cash from operations, we only generated 15.9. Capital revenues were down, as I said, that's mainly tied to the T-Rex project. So rather than getting 9.4 million in from capital subsidies from external organisations, we only received 3 million. And so from a funding available for capital, rather than having $26 million available, we only had $19 million available. Now, if we were to spend our capital expenditure like planned, that would have been a significant issue. We would have taken on $7 million worth of debt. However, the organisation reduced its capital expenditure to live within its means. So rather than spending 30 million, we only spent 17.2. So as a result, rather than borrowing the 4.2, we've ended the year better off by 1.7, and that's where the 5.9 million better off are. Now, the key thing is these numbers will look different from the annual report. And the reason why they look different from the annual report is because of the non-cash entries that we've had to undertake with regards to our capital expenditure, which I'll go into a bit more. Now, from an audit process point of view, so Audit New Zealand have completed the audit. They have issued an audit clearance memo. So the opinion itself hasn't been released. We will get that on the 29th after council has formally adopted. The big thing with the audit, though, there was a very heavy focus on the way that this organisation accounts for its fixed assets, and that, along with the change of accounting standards from New Zealand international equivalents to public benefit, has meant that a lot of work has gone into our fixed asset treatments. Just before I go into that, just again touching on the journey, and I touched on it at the start. So late 2013, we introduced a new financial framework. The 2014 year, that was the annual report, we provided clarity on the self-funding reserves. We effectively got rid of them because they were just confusing to people. We clarified airport debt, we clarified where the debt sat in our organisations, and we also identified the issue of our services being underfunded. 2015, this year, this is a continuation of our understanding our finances. And so this year has been a focus on fixed assets, and in particular how we're treating those fixed assets in our books. And key again that this annual report, $8.3 million worth of operating expenditure was removed. I'll keep highlighting that because that actually is significant. So for this organisation to end the year operating wise on budget with that sort of cost saving, I think is outstanding. So what are the non-cash fixed adjustments? Part of it is about, you recall we have multiple fixed asset management systems. We've consolidated them now into two, one for roading, one for the rest of the organisation's assets. That process has highlighted duplicate assets, which we've had to remove, and so they get recognised in our statement of financial performance as fixed asset write-downs. We've also looked at expenditure waiting to be capitalised. So in previous years when we talk about capital expenditure, we record it as capital expenditure. That goes through our cash flow statement as capital expenditure. But within our accounting system, we hold it in an account until that asset has been actually completed, and therefore we can create a physical asset in our register. What we found is that we actually had about $20 million sitting in there, accumulated over the years, and a lot of the stuff in there was dating back 2009s, 10s, 11s, 12s, and we found it was very hard to justify actually creating an asset for that. So things like the lakefront review and development plan that was done back in, I think, 2009-10 was sitting in there, and that was never going to lead to an asset now, not with the design work that was done. The other big one in there is resource consent costs with regards to the Victoria Street arterial. So with the decision to remove the designation, those costs would not eventuate to the asset with regards to that being built. So we had to remove it from the balance sheet, where it's held as an asset waiting to be capitalised, and expensive. Whereas the actual expenditure incurred when we actually physically paid the money took place many, many years ago. The other big one driving this is economic assessment of existing assets. So the big one there is our asset in the forest. So we've got an $8 million asset with regards to the land treatment system in the forest. Our consent expires in 3 years' time. So what we've had to do is recognise that that $8 million asset doesn't have a 50-year economic life anymore. It has an economic life of 3 years, and we've had to adjust it appropriately. So we've written down that asset by about $7 million, and that too is reflected in our statement of financial performance in our annual report. But again, it's a non-cash adjustment. The cash costs reflected were incurred many, many years ago. We're just taking an asset or value off our balance sheet and moving it to our statement of comprehensive income, or otherwise known as profit and loss statement. So the big note there is that it does not have a cash impact. So if I take what I did before with regards to the simple cash flow statement, and I included these items in there, the changes that you'll see are the items in blue. So we've moved capital revenue up because the accounting standards, and for all purposes, we recognise capital revenue as revenue in our statement of comprehensive income. We've included the asset write-downs, so there's $9.2 million there. And we've included our revaluation gains. So some of the assets that we've written down are also reflected in this figure here by pulling it down, whereas some sit above. And that just depends on when we write the asset down. We are sometimes writing assets down that have been revalued. So when we write it down, any write-down of a previous revaluation gain gets reflected down here, and any write-down in actual historical cost sits above the line. The big thing though is that while we've introduced these items above, and effectively we've introduced a $9.2 million additional expense line in there, it is non-cash. So where we talked about before, the big focus there is surplus there. You'll see that from a surplus we budgeted $1 million, and we've achieved $15.9 million deficit. So that's being driven off the fact that our capital subsidies are down significantly, and we're recognising fixed asset write-downs. It is not related to operating costs. It's not related to staff expenses. It's not related to interest costs. It's not related to depreciation. It's not related to contractor payments. That variance is purely being driven by the recognition of fixed asset write-downs and does not have a cash impact, as can be seen here. Because when I back out the non-cash variances, I get to exactly the same position where we had before, the funding available for capital expenditure. 27.4 million budgeted, 17.7 million, 19 million available. Again, we've reduced our capital expenditure, and cash-wise, we've ended up in exactly the same position. And I think that's the key here. This is not a cost buyout. It is being driven, that result, by fixed asset write-downs. If it was, as some people think, driven by poor financial management and driven by actual operating expenditure whereby we physically pay a cash, we could not have achieved this outcome. That would have been reflected by the fact that we would have had a cash shortfall and we would have had to borrow to fund the difference. And that is not the case. So any questions?
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Thomas could just go back to the graph on the debt projection. And I'm interested in some comment on the debt ceiling red line there. So I understand why it's dipped to point B is that we reduced our debt to revenue ratio and also our revenues decreased. But I see that it goes up, so that the factors involved in that increasing red line, the debt ceiling, that will not only include rate increases, I guess the subsidies and projections for increased revenue and all of that. Could you give us some sort of an idea of why that tracks the way it does, please?
So the reason for that's a reflection of rate increase as well as so sorry, that's reflective of the rate as well as projected increases in external other revenue sources. And you'll see that in the 3-month result as well with regards to the pleasing result in some areas where those revenues have grown.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the comparison on page 88 of the annual accounts. Page 88 of the annual report, which shows that the deficit before and after tax is 15.951 million. I look at the same figure in the Statement of Comprehensive Income and Expense from the Audit and Risk Committee meeting, which shows a figure of 10.996 million. The basic difference, quite obviously, having just seen the explanation, is $5 million worth of asset write-downs. And my question is this: if this council is required by law to maintain its operating expenditure within its operating revenue, which it is not doing, why are we accounting for $5 million worth of asset write-downs within the operating expenditure, yet the revaluation of assets is not included in those figures? Can you explain that, please?
That's a fairly good question, and unfortunately that's down to international accounting standards and recognition, which are things I don't have control over. So the accounting regulations that everyone uses throughout the world for organisations of our size acknowledge the fact that asset write-downs are what we report above the line in the operating area, and revaluations are below the line. And that's just the way that, unfortunately, we have to report it.
Thank you. A supplementary from that then. If that is the case, in terms of Section 100 of the Act, which requires operating expenditure to be maintained within operating revenue unless there is a very prudent reason for doing so, are we actually complying with the law here? Because my belief is at 15.951 million deficit, operating deficit, we are not.
Look, we most certainly are operating within the law. We are not illegal. This is, unfortunately, the regulations that the Department of Internal Affairs set with regards to the balanced budget doesn't take into account accounting treatment that we have to do at the end of the year in recognition of international financial reporting standards, and the two are out of alignment. I think you nailed on the head when you said that we all recognise that this is not true operating expenditure. So therefore, I'm not sure what the issue is, Councillor.
Well, my issue just is, are we not obeying the law, and should we be concerned at a $15.951 million deficit?
Well, you've had that assurance.
As I said, we are well within the law. Audit New Zealand has just completed their audit, and I'm sure if they felt that we were outside of our boundaries and unlawful, I'm sure the council would have heard about it long before now.
I think this is a really good point. So I think it needs to be absolutely clarified, because there is considerable apprehension out there in the community, particularly in the business community and the development community, of some of the statements that are being made out there that are totally incorrect. So, Chief Executive Officer, could I ask you to comment?
Just trying to simplify, I think the question is really fundamentally, are we spending more than what we're earning? If you look at the funding available line, which is the bottom line on the financial statement, our net result is that we have achieved a cash surplus position of 1.7 million. That clearly indicates that we have actually spent less than what we have earned. So we have a cash surplus position, which has allowed us to obviously retire debt. So when a member of the public asks the question, Council, are you living within your means? The answer has to be, given that we have been able to retire debt this year due to a cash surplus, the answer has to be definitely yes.
So, Councillor Kent.
Thank you. But am I not correct in thinking that we've actually retired that debt because we've sold $2 million worth of assets?
Mr. Cole,
That helped, yes.
that helped the bottom line.
And we did budget to sell assets, so yes, that did help.
So that figure of selling those assets was included in that 4.231 deficit that we had budgeted for. I have just one question for you, Thomas, before I come to Councillor McVicker. The $5.981 million variance between the funding available and that was borrowed, we had budgeted to borrow over and above what we were budgeting, $4.231 million, and we've turned that round to a $1.75 million surplus. That's why we've had a turnaround of the 5.91. The other thing is that aren't we required by law, and I'm taking up Councillor Kent's point, aren't we required by law to label the write-downs for depreciation as an operating expense?
That's correct. We're required to record it there, yes.
And then we add it back, as you state, under revaluation and other gains, add it back to show the comprehensive income. Because as you showed us on that graph, in the past, we were borrowing money to fund the operation of this council. And you have turned that around within 2 years.
Well,
Oh, sorry, mate, I turned you off.
you raise a very good point. What I might just do is just go back to this debt graph to highlight, and it might communicate this easier. So if you look at the last 2 years and you look at just that one line in our statement of comprehensive revenue expenses, and it's always dangerous when you just use one line halfway down a financial statement and use it out of context. And you'll notice that this year was $15.9 million deficit, and I think last year was $13 million deficit. So that's combined a $28 million deficit. If that was actually true operating expenditure and that we lived outside of our means, rather than actually being driven off the fact that it's asset write-downs, I'm not seeing a $28 million increase in our debt those 2 years. So we are living without our means. This is down to the accounting treatment and the tidying up. It is not down to poor financial management and not living within our means.
Firstly, I'd like to say that the financial management of this council has improved dramatically in the last couple of years, and I compliment the staff who have achieved that end. I still, however, have some questions I would like clarifications on regarding debt. You mentioned today that our total debt is $167.5 million, yet in the bottom of page 21 you point out that Council's current debt, overall debt, net of $18.4 million held on behalf of the Rotorua Airport is $145. What is the accepted figure? What do the auditors support? The 167, or why do you factor in the airport debt and reduce it to 145?
So first of all, the 167 relates to our end of year position as at the 30th of June. The figure you're referring to there is our 3-month result for the end of September, so 2 different places in time. For that one there, what we've said there is that the debt is 161 or whatever it was, but we're recognising that 18.4 belongs to the airport because we've sent it off, we've allocated it towards there, so the core council debt therefore is 145. But from total debt terms, it is the 2 combined, which I've highlighted here as well.
Confusing the issue when we talk about core debt and actual debt. Surely we have one debt, which is 167.
Yep, that's correct.
And furthermore, I just wonder why the airport content at the top there had not been included in previous years, for example?
Well, it has been, but
I
in
know,
our
but it
LT
should have been illustrated in green.
the reason why it's illustrated is because the purple line actually reflects the debt that we've got in our LTP and doesn't recognise that 18.4 million that's sat with the airport.
So can we get an agreement on what is our total debt, 167?
Well, I've made that very clear, Councillor. Our total debt was 167 million. 18.4. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There is no confusion. So.
Okay, secondly, if I can raise the auditor's report, which I was trying to find, I think I read a comment by them saying that we would have to effect $56 million worth of savings over the next 10 years to achieve our debt forecast, expenditure forecast. Is that correct? Am I right in saying that?
So you're referring to the opinion related to our long-term plan. So let's be clear, this is not related to our annual report.
Sorry.
So on that, that's around the 85% funding
Yeah.
of our capital expenditure. So what they're saying is that if we don't achieve 85% spend, then we would have to find another $50 million. I think the pleasing thing, as you can see there, is that we're on track to only spend 85%, and that's what we will manage this organisation to. So we don't see it as an issue whatsoever.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, our debt reduction program, it would be handy perhaps if we could have a review of where we're going with that, because I think in this report where we are changing the fleet purchase from capital expenditure to expensing it. Is that correct? And what are the ramifications of that?
First of all, I'm not aware of any changes to the fleet. We will continue to purchase our fleet. Secondly, with regards to our debt, it's important to recognise as well that during the year our level of debt will fluctuate. So every 3 months we receive a significant amount of income from rates, so we use that opportunity to pay down debt and then redraw it based on our working capital requirements.
Thank
so
you,
the
but
important one is our end of year debt position.
Yes, sir. Did I not read in this report that we are going to expense our fleet purchases, not capitalise them? And what are the ramifications? And that's why I'm suggesting we need to have a review perhaps of that debt reduction program and just see where we are heading and identify what we would be able to reduce our debt by furthermore in the future.
So, Councillor, if you could point out where that is in the report, I can address it. But as I said, I'm looking at my two senior finance people behind you, and they're looking at me blankly as well. So,
Councillor Kent probably raises a good point. It's probably in the notes to the long-term plan, so we'll locate that because I'm sure he'll have that at his fingertips. So just based on that graph there, someone in the community could say quite correctly that the debt of this council will top $200 million in 2020 because of the sewage issues that we are faced with as a council, because we're not allowed to spray irrigate anymore in the Whakarewarewa forest. Is that correct? And the Rotorua issue to ensure that Lake Rotorua remains a pristine lake.
those two projects aren't driving all the debt, but are driving the majority of the increase, yes.
Just so I can get it in my head, of the $167.5 million debt that you've signalled today, 18.4 of that is airport. In percentage terms, and I know you'll probably look at your staff, in percentage terms, most of that is infrastructural debt. It's nice. It's not the flowery bed gardens and all those sorts of things. It's like the energy event centre purchase. It's like the stadium development debts that's built up over years and years. It's just not debt that we've incurred in the last 3 or 4 years.
Some of it does relate to that, but clearly, as where we talked about it from 2008 to 13, where our debt increased significantly, there was an element where we were borrowing to fund our operating expenditure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reference to the 56.4 million in the auditor's report is actually on page 246 of the long-term plan, if someone wants it. It says, as set out on page 8 and 9 of the plan, the Council has decided to set a funding envelope for the life of this plan that funds only 85% of the planned capital expenditure programme that the Council set out in its consultation document.
In order to achieve this reduced level of capital expenditure over the period of the plan without affecting levels of service, the Council is required to find savings and efficiencies totalling $56.4 million. On page 84 of the plan, the Council broadly outlines how it plans to reduce its capital expenditure, but at this stage has not identified any specific proposals to achieve the total level of savings required.
Thomas?
That is,
So, through you, Chair, I think the key point is that the long-term financial strategy is, as you're correctly pointing out, assuming an 85% spend on capital level, and there was a considerable debate within this chamber when we set that policy and direction. I think this is a discussion about the annual report and the actual result of year to date. So in looking at our performance to date, we have actually met that requirement. So I think today you can draw the conclusion in the last year we are actually able to meet that 85%. That's effectively what we've demonstrated.
Which we all set.
Thank you. Okay, just coming back to the actual annual report, Thomas made the comment earlier about if we sort of eliminated the loss on disposal and impairment of plant, property and equipment figures, then we were actually operating in accordance with Section 100, but that still doesn't quite add up to me, because if you look at page 88 of the annual accounts, the amount in the 2 years for loss on disposal and impairment of plant, property and equipment amounts to $12.125 million. So we have still exceeded our operating revenue by $12 million of operating expenditure. So we are not compliant, surely.
look, Councillor, you're looking at a report and you're interpreting it in a way that that's all cash, and it's not. Also, the fact that some of that revenue included capital subsidies, whereby the expenditure doesn't reflect in that line either. From a purist point of view, if you want to look at the graph, and you're right, that we were, I think, ended about 90% against the balanced budget, and so we wouldn't have achieved that measure. I think fundamentally, though, if you bring it back to our overall funding position in cash, we lived well within our means, and I think that's the problem with when you just take one measure out of many in isolation and use it the way that you are.
I think the other thing that's going on here is you're quoting a statutory provision out of context. The section you're quoting, Section 100, is a budgeting provision. It's not a financial management provision, it's a budgeting provision. So whenever the council sets its budget, the council should set its budget so that all operating revenues cover all operating expenses through a measure at the P&L line, unless the council determines that there is a reason to do otherwise, right? And in doing so, if the council is setting its budget at a deficit, it needs to pass a resolution to state that it's doing so and the rationale for doing so and why it believes it's a prudent measure to do so. It's not a prospective element in terms of what the final result comes out at.
Comment to that, we certainly have not passed that resolution, because the budget that was presented and the 10-year plan indicated exactly the point you're making, Councillor Kent, that we needed to live within our means, and we had indicated it in that 10-year plan, and that last year's performance has indicated and justified that we are living within that plan.
And the other
Oh, sorry, mate.
The other subtle technicality that comes into the mix actually is that you can't budget for an asset write-down, right? Because actually, technically, if you know there's going to be an asset write-down next year, you need to recognise it in the year that you're currently in, right? So you will not see budgets that have asset value write-downs. You see them with asset revaluations based on assumptions. But you can't assume a write-down in the value of the asset, because then if you have the basis to assume it, then you must recognise it in the opening balance sheet position before you get to your budget year. 'Cause, 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 'cause,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Thomas, for your report. I just want to try and make it easy for people listening to this conversation that the red line is 175% of the income, and that we can go, if necessary, to 200% in case of emergency. If something severe should happen to Rotorua and we need to fix or replace assets, we've got the ability to fix or replace them because of the buffer between the two figures.
Thomas,
Look, the council does have the capacity to go above 175%. With a credit rating, you can go up to 250%. Without a credit rating, you can go above 175 as well by not using the local government funding agency and going to other sources, but the cost of borrowing does increase marginally.
but it is certainly nothing that we've indicated
No, but
in our budgets that we intend to go above where we're at the moment.
No, and rest assured that if Rotorua faced an emergency, if a disaster hit and we had to get quick access to funds, we have those facilities in place, and those funds will be readily available.
Thomas, have you any further questions? Councillor Gould?
I've got a question when we come up to recommendation number 2 on the financial matter, but I'll bring it up then.
Further questions? Or did you have another one, Councillor McVeigh? Would someone like to move that the presentation on the annual report update be accepted? Councillor Hunt, seconded Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Now we'll move on to. Oh God, hang on. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Yep, I got it. Thank you very much for your help. Right, we continue in action. Would someone like to move recommendation 1 that the continuing action report be received? Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Donaldson. Is there any comment? Councillor Donaldson, did you have a question? Okay. I see. Oh, it's these buttons. I see in the local media today that the chair of the former Pro Dems has admitted that they are electioneering signs, and I just wondered whether that changes the. Well, I'll quote the article. What we are doing is to create interest in local government, and that there isn't an election next year. So that insinuates you're doing it because it's electioneering. So I just wondered, we were focusing on the size of the signs. $5,000, as Councillor Bentley has pointed out, was spent on a legal opinion. Could you please help us out, because I did ask for this report.
I will, Councillor. What we've done, and I think it's important to note that we did not get a legal opinion, as somebody has said, on yellow and black signs. We got a legal opinion in regards to signage in the district. And while that sounds subtle, I think it is actually quite important. The element that we've done, and why we've been cautious in responding to this, is actually that this is a district-wide issue in regards to signs on property, and that's why we've gone to get a legal opinion, because there are a lot of signs which you would say technically don't comply with those same provisions, that the council has taken a permissive approach to, on the basis that we have had no significant, in fact no, element of public pushback around concern. So what we've done here is actually to respond to the concerns that have been raised by the community, either through Facebook pages, through ringing the council, or alternatively through letters to the editor. We pick up these issues far more from a safety point of view and an amenity point of view. These, obviously, for the ones we're talking about, no real safety issues around it, but that's where we pick up these types of things. So there's a view, I guess, that people are entitled to use their own property in a way that they think is reasonable. And that's really the permissive element. Where it starts to become a concern, obviously, is when an individual's use of their property has an impact on another person's enjoyment of their property or the amenity within the community. So that's where we act on these things. And we act on those, for similar issues around noise, visual elements, cars parked on roadsides or left on berms, that type of thing for a long period of time. So we react to those. So really what we've been doing is reacting to that issue in terms of the public concern. And of course a number of people have been seeking council's opinion on these things. So therefore we had to reach an opinion on it, we had to reach a conclusion on it. The conclusion we've reached is that the signs don't comply with the district plan provisions, but they don't comply in terms of size for a number of them. So the size of a temporary sign is 3 square metres. Right? So any sign which is above 3 square metres on a person's property doesn't comply with the district plan. So that's your limitation on it, and that's not per sign, that's signs on an individual property. So that's all of the signs in terms of that physical space. The other element that we've had to look at is the element of temporary signs. And so you can have a temporary sign on a property, but it typically only relates to an event that is occurring on that property. That's an area where we have been quite lenient because of the issues around, again, sort of school galas, that type of thing, where they're looking to promote those things 6 weeks in advance. Shows is the other thing. So rather than getting heavy-handed with that, we don't think that's actually in the community's interest to do so. So we haven't done that. So really what we're doing here is responding to the issue where we've had this issue raised with us, looking at it from a compliance point of view. We will be writing to the owners in the next 2 or 3 days of those properties. We have had a look at the comment made by the chair of Pro-Dems. I'm avoiding going down the track of councillor. Well, sorry, no, I'm sorry, councillor. I didn't want to go down the track of going down that path. So, all right. So within that, Councillor Sarang's, we've looked at those comments. I agree with Councillor Sarang's comment. She is not saying in there that they are election signs. I think within that she's saying that there is an election and they're looking to make people aware of that. So within that, the next issue that we run into, of course, is that a temporary sign can be there for 6 weeks. The element around that, of course, is that these signs are changing on a regular basis. So the question that we've asked of people is, so is that sort of playing with the rules or manipulating the rules potentially? So therefore, the view that's come back is effectively three periods of 6 weeks, 18 weeks is a view that we believe will actually then make that permanent signage, as opposed to a permanent sign, but permanent signage. So actually changing the nature of the sign or moving it from one place to another, we don't believe sort of resets the clock back to 6 weeks every time that you do it. So we're working on the basis of 3 consecutive elements of 6 weeks. Even if the sign changes within that, would actually then make it a permanent sign, and at that point we'll be actioning it under the permanent signs rules.
Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take it we're going to get a formal report at the next meeting, is that correct? And the other thing, election signs are totally different. They've got a total governance with 6 weeks before the election for next year. So in other words, I can't put up an election sign on my window and change it every 6 weeks or 5 weeks.
You're right, there are different rules, interesting, administered by different people too. So that's actually administered by the electoral officer as opposed to being administered by a compliance. There's also other elements in regards to that. So a political sign needs to effectively denote the party and the person, and it's authorised by a particular person for it to go up. But yeah, so.
Sir Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I have a little bit of clarification in terms of our district plan, please? Is there any restriction in the number of signs that a person can have on their property?
For temporary signage, it's 3 square metres.
Per sign?
No, 3 square metres.
Three square metres of
square metres of
signage
signs.
in total?
Yep.
Okay. So in other words, a sign that is 2.4 metres by 1.2 metres is perfectly legal. That's 2.88 square metres.
I think people are dragging this down an element of legality. We're coming down and using a consistent terminology. It's compliance with the plan.
Correct.
Right? The plan has sort of legal framework in behind it, but the plan isn't law. Right? So the plan is the plan, and the law is determined by effectively prosecution, probably through the Environment Court ultimately, in terms of whether or not a law has been broken.
Okay, and my next question is, what is the definition of a sign in accordance with the plan, please? Does a question mark stand for a sign? Because I don't think it does.
Thank you, Chair. The issue that we have here is actually quite a difficult one. Quite clearly, this organisation is the topic of these signs. And the issue about it is that we're also the regulator. And so we have got two obligations here which we have to try and carefully balance. The topic that, or the approach that the staff have used is that we are not interested in the nature of the content of the signs. We're not interested. What we have to be interested, though, is the impact of large yellow boards with whatever the words are on them. And what does our community consider that these are adding or detracting from the amenity of the place that we all live? Now that really is the topic that we're trying to actually resolve, and there are various parties on one side saying these are important discussions to be asked or important questions to be asked, and on the other we've got people saying we don't like big yellow signs in our community and we want them gone. Thank you very much. And Council, your obligation is to try and manage this situation. And so whatever we do here, I suspect no one is going to be entirely happy. And so what the position that the staff have taken is trying to go down a track that is a middle ground and as fair to people as actually possible without alienating either party. Now this, you can see, is very, very tricky. If we go down the track of the letter of the law and try and get into the debate on is this legal or isn't it legal, we're probably going to fail both parties in some way or other. And I think it's probably a track that we're currently trying to avoid. What we're trying to do is to take a balanced, rational approach that on one side says, if you want to ask a question on a large yellow sign on your property, well, we're not going to immediately jump and write a letter or take it down. But on the other hand, if you live in a community or you look at signs and for reasons of the fact that you run a tourism venture and you see this is detracting from your offer as a tourism operator, or if you live in a locality that you see yellow signs as detracting from the amenity value of your community, then we can't afford to ignore those pleas either. And so this is the track that we're fundamentally trying to follow.
One further question. I got a couple of complaints about a sign in Malfoy Road, and at any given time there's more than 3 metres of signs on that particular site, so that's never complied. But people are saying, well, if I haven't given permission for that to be attached to my fence, and the people who put the signs up damage my fence, do I seek compensation off the council?
This is a different matter. People can't put a sign on your fence, and the party who does so and damages your fence is actually liable at that stage.
Just while you're looking into the signage issue, it may pay to look into the electioneering rules and regulations too, because most of the councillors around this table blatantly disobey the law in terms of putting their signs affixed to fences, which is not permitted.
Through you, Chair, I'll reiterate the comment that I made before, which may have been missed. The council does not administer through the compliance section those rules. They're administered by the electoral office.
It's been moved. Oh, Councillor Gould.
I take offence to Councillor Kent's accusation. All the signs that put up in the last election, I got permission from the people who did it. So I'm not one of those who go willy-nilly going around seeking up election signs.
And your question is?
I take offence to his comments. It doesn't apply to me.
Councillor Kent.
If I can just respond to that, I wasn't saying anything other than perhaps councillors should be aware that under the Electoral Act you are not permitted to fasten electoral signs to fences. Period.
Oh. Page 20, which is the financial performance for the 3 months ended September 2015 be received. We've got some slides coming up on this. Someone like to move that recommendation, Councillor Donaldson, Councillor Hunt. We'll just hold it in abeyance until we've heard the report. Mr. Cole again, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. 3-month performance to date. Pleasing operating result is on track. There are some minor variances to income and expenditure. Pleasingly, the expenditure from fees and revenues is up by about $100,000 and mainly driven off the back of strong performance from the museum. Our operating expenditure is down slightly, in particular being driven by cheaper electricity costs, which may turn around if we have a very hot summer, and cheaper, less interest costs. And that's on the back of some refinancing work that we've done and managed to reduce our cost of borrowing. Capital expenditure wise, so again, this is the first year where we've got that 85% funding. At this stage, we're on track to achieve that, so there's nothing in there that suggests that we won't live within that funding mechanism. And at next month's O&M, we'll actually provide councillors with a detailed update of where each of the individual capital projects are, which ones are progressing on track, which will likely be delayed or deferred as such, so that will be next month. So at this stage, we believe there's to forecast the end of the year within the funding provided in the annual plan, and there are no issues. If I was to do a similar exercise as before, I apologise, I won't stand up this time, Chair. The right-hand side is our forecast against annual plan, and as you can see, we are forecasting to end the year and on plan. The left-hand side is our year-to-date, so rates are slightly ahead of budget. Fees and charges are $111,000 ahead. Subsidies and grants are slightly behind. So overall, our total revenue is $163,000 ahead of the budget to date. Operating expenditure is pretty much bang on, about a positive variance of $7,000, and you can see there that the operating expenses are favourable as well as finance, but these are being offset by some unfavourable positions in staff expenses and depreciation. They are pretty minor and they do just come down to timing, and we expect this to just work its way through for the remainder of the year. So from an operating surplus point of view, we were budgeting $1.5 million deficit for the period, and we've achieved a $1.4 million deficit, so we're $170,000 better off. Important to note as well that that does not include capital subsidies. So if I do a similar exercise as to what we did before, we take that operating deficit and we add back our non-cash items, mainly to being depreciation, but also take into account changes in working capital. And working capital, what I mean there is generally accounts payable and costs that sit on our balance sheet that relate to previous year that we've accrued, but we're actually physically paying them out this year. We've generated cash flows of about $700,000 for the period, and that's pretty much on budget. So how we've applied that? So we have received $500,000 worth of capital subsidies. We have got $2.5 million of capital expenditure to date, And I think it's important to note when we talk about total capital expenditure of 34 million for the year, for 3 months or a quarter of the year, we've only spent 2.5 million. With regards to just considering the impact of trying to live within that 85% funding. As I said, there are no issues at the moment with regards to trying to live within that. So overall, we've been in a position whereby we've been able to reduce some debt as well, and our cash balances have reduced. So we held nearly $6 million of cash on hand at the start of the year, and we've used 5.3 million of that for the period. From a debt perspective, so just providing some clarity on the debt. So the overall debt is down slightly on the start of the financial year, and that just reflects the fact that we've had $15 million of debt mature. The very pleasing thing with that debt maturing is that we were incurring interest costs of high 6%, and we've replaced it with high 3s. So there's been a very good saving. So as a result of just that $15 million being refinanced, our average cost of borrowing has reduced from 5.4% to 5.2%, and at this moment is forecast to continue to slowly reduce over time as we refinance our debt. Other than that, any questions, Chair?
Kent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I'm pleased to see that you're within the budget, my concern is still with the budget itself, and the fact that since there aren't any asset write-downs in these figures, surely this figure is not in compliance with Section 100 of the Act, because I don't know of any prudent reason why we're budgeting to lose money.
Councillor, again, reiterating, we are not budgeting to lose money. This result does not include the capital subsidies, which are included in the calculation of the balanced budget.
Excuse me, capital subsidies are not operating revenue.
Well, regardless, Councillor, it is recognised as revenue and is included in the balanced budget under the requirements of the Department of Internal Affairs. So while you may not agree with it, ultimately that is the way we do it. We are compliant with it as per the rules.
And you have to operate.
And we are operating with a balanced budget for this year.
Within the law and under the auspices of Audit New Zealand. So I think, Councillor Kent, you've worn that path pretty strenuous over the last 18 months, and Thomas repeatedly at every meeting has to explain why that is the situation. If you keep asking those questions, he'll keep explaining it, and that's fine. That's your right. Councillor Gould.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Thomas, for your report. I'm going to question some of your figures. On page 21, you've got the current overall debt of the council is 145 plus the regional airport at 18.4. Do you agree that those two figures are 163.4 million?
I'm sure they are, Councillor, yes. I don't know. I can get a calculator if you like.
Okay, I'm now going to quote from the Audit and Risk Committee.
I'll stop you now, Councillor, because the Audit and Risk Committee relates to the end of the financial year, 30th of June. This figure relates to the 30th of September.
Correct. Correct. Now, the reason why is that the report I'm quoting from is the 23rd of September. On page 24, item number 22, borrowings have decreased 1.175 million to 167.5. Bearing in mind cash held of 5.9, net debt is 161.6. You take 161.6 off 163.4, you get a deficit of 1.8 million, not 1.4 million as per your report on page 20.
Can you explain that, please?
I'm unfortunately not sure what you're actually after, other than the fact that I may be able to respond by the fact that our debt moves daily, weekly. So therefore it's very hard to take a debt position in one report that relates to the 30th of June and tie it to what's actually happened after the 30th of June.
I'll respond to that. One debt on page 24 was showing what the debt was as at the 30th of June, which you were saying at 161.6, which probably shouldn't have altered. And your report on page 21 stating that the current debt probably at the 30th of September was at 18.4 for the regional airport and 145 for council. This figure's not agree.
Well, yeah, you're right. So the debt has moved by the 1.8 million as you've suggested over that 3-month period, and will continue to change and has is different again today, and the key is what it will be at the end of the year when we've completed the year and understand our full funding position. That's correct. Yep.
There's a difference.
Councillor Gould, the 1.410 that you talk about on page 20 is the actual, and on page 21 it's got borrowings, loans drawn down 10.9, loans repaid 15, a deficit of 4.1. So the debt has actually increased by, as I read by that, by 4.1 million. But the year-to-date position is that the debt will only be drawn down to the stage of $7 million. So you're quoting the Audit and Risk Committee, which gave a position at the end of June, which is the end of the reporting cycle. This is the first 3 months of the new financial year, and this is what on page 20 and 21, Thomas is giving you the actual, what we had budgeted for, and what is the variance over that 3 months. What happened to the end of June is a different story, because the budget from the 1st of July is what he is quoting from here in that second column on that graph there. So I don't think you're talking at cross purposes. It's just understanding something finishes here and starts there. So, Thomas, can you just clarify, you said earlier the debt level is 167.5, of which 18.4 is the airport. That has not changed.
Yeah, that's correct. And look, if I may, I appreciate the scrutiny that you give our numbers, Councillor, and I'm happy to catch up after this meeting and walk through it and get a better understanding of it. Yep.
Councillor Gould. Councillor McVicker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question, if I may. Castle Court became a CCO on the 1st of August. That's impacted on the forecast for the staff expenses by about $7 or $8 million. Did it have any impact on the debt?
Not yet. So, very, very good question, Councillor. Look, this result does not include Castle Court or Rotorua Contracting as it's known. So Rotorua Contracting will report their 3 to 4 month result at next month's O&M along with Grow Rotorua, the airport and DRM. So next O&M is the turn of our CCOs. With regards to the debt, we are just working through the asset transfers, what assets are required, and there will be an element of debt and equity funding of that. And it is likely that $1 million or so of debt will transition across to Rotorua Contracting. Yep.
Mr. Chair, you mentioned you didn't factor in or didn't take into account Rotorua or Castle Corp as it was called then, but it surely would have had a month of July costs included in the staff costs, for example?
Yeah, for these purposes, we have excluded that, and Rotorua Contracting will report as if it was for the full year. So we haven't tried to, if we had left that 1 month in that it operated within council, it would have just confused the situation, and we would have constantly having to be explaining the variances. By separating it, it makes it a lot cleaner and easier. Yep.
$1 million $1 million debt that is now going to be associated with Castle Court will come off the operational debt of the Rotorua District Council. It'll still be in the debt figure of 167.5, but we'll be able to see it parked like we can with the airport.
Yes, and don't quote me on the million. As I said, that was indicative of we have to have discussions on that. So whatever debt is transitioned across will still be reported as under council's total debt, but some of it will be the airport and some of it will be Rotorua Contracting. Yes.
All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. And thank you for your questions. Page 23, the quarterly progress towards 2030 September update. Would someone like to move that that report be received? Councillor Bentley, seconded Councillor Hunt. We'll hold that until the discussion and then I'll put the motion. Welcome, ladies. It's Amy McGregor, our strategy manager. Welcome, Amy. And if you'd
Thank you, Charles.
introduce your
Yes, I have
co-presenter.
Linda Goldsmith here with me. She's the program lead strategy within the team and has pulled this report together for us. So she's here to help me to answer any questions. And I think she's done a great job. I'm very pleased to be here presenting this first quarterly snapshot report of our progress towards our 2030 vision. I guess there's a bit of a background. There's been a lot of good news in the press of late, I think, around Rotorua, which has been fabulous. But they're all, I guess, occurring at different times with different measures. And what this does, I guess, is we've taken two key measures and tried to provide a quarterly or more frequent basis and bring them together in a holistic picture in terms of how we're tracking against our whole all seven goals, not just one element at a time at different times. So, what's happening there? Oh, there we go. Okay, so the idea is it gives us greater frequency than looking at these measures, say, on an annual or an annual plan type basis, so we can actually get a more frequent view and therefore be able to respond more quickly with actions that potentially we can take or the community can take to try to move us towards our 2030 vision. Just to be clear, this is, I guess, is a reflection of the whole of community, the whole of district. This is not council performance as such. This is measures that we are just but one small part, I guess, in terms of driving with our partners and with our community towards the 2030 vision. You'll recall that we workshopped what those metrics would be in December last year, and the fact that we wanted to try to get measures as frequently as possible, and they were deemed to be quarterly was as frequent as we could get. And we also tried to limit the number of measures per goal just to ideally one or two measures that would give us a snapshot or a reflection without us sort of getting buried or lost in too many different metrics. So all measures are quarterly apart from the environmental ones, which tend to be either have a seasonal element to them, things like air quality, which is most relevant over the winter periods, or things like the lake water quality, which have I guess a long-term view is the most appropriate view to be taken due to different conditions and stuff that happen in different years. Okay, so overall I'm thrilled as well that 6 of the 7 goals are showing as tracking is very much on track. The environmental one we'll just talk a little more about shortly. But I'll just take you quickly through each of them and then cover questions at the end if that's okay. Chair. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so a resilient community. The measures that we've used for this one have centred around the safety and the sense of connection. They're not metrics that are available through Statistics New Zealand or anything like that. So the way that we've gone about collecting those is through a perception survey. So we're undertaking a perception survey on a quarterly basis so that we can provide something to track this particular goal rather than leaving it with nothing. We don't have a prior comparison at this point because this was the first survey for this report, but we will obviously next quarter be able to have a view and see if this is changing. So we've used our judgment to say that I guess the majority of our population do feel very well connected, very well or well connected. So that I think is 63%. And we have a small proportion of 6.8% who don't feel well connected. But overall, we feel this is a reasonable position to be in, with by far the majority feeling very well or well connected. Regarding safety, which is the next measure, the general question in terms of do residents think that our district is generally a safe place to live? We had overwhelming, I guess 91% of people said yes, and a few people, I think 3% there don't know, and 6% say no. So there's a similar measure, I think, in the annual plan, which looks at whether people feel that Rotorua is definitely or mostly a safe place to live, and the target for that in the past year was 85%. So given it's a very similar type of a question, I guess it looks 91% is looking, I guess, definitely on track. Okay, so the next goal that we have is homes that match needs, so quality, affordable homes that are safe, warm and available. The 2 metrics that we've chosen here are around the quality of our housing stock, our homes. So we're measuring that through the value of new housing starts and renewals, with the assumption being that the more new houses we bring into our district, the more renewals, renovations, alterations that are done, overall the quality of the stock will be increasing. So this figure is up 2.4% for the quarter to June, and that's versus a New Zealand average, 12.4%, thank you, Charles, Councillor Stewart, versus a New Zealand average of 5.6%. So we've marked that as being on track, so it's a good result for the quarter. The second measure that we've chosen there is around that ability to have warm homes. So there's a program underway around healthy homes and warming up New Zealand homes through subsidised insulation. And the figures we've got is annual here. We will add the quarterly results as we receive them for subsequent reports. But you'll see that versus the prior year, there were 573 homes that were insulated through this program in the most recent year, and then that compares to 136 in the year prior. So a big step up. And obviously this isn't all homes that are insulated, because it doesn't take into consideration private investment, which also occurs in terms of obviously people insulating their homes without using the subsidised funds. So that is also on track. Okay, outstanding places to play. So our absolutely. Our recreation opportunities are part of our lifestyle, connecting us, transporting us and surrounding us. So the measure that we discussed in December when we workshopped these was essentially around participation. How often are people being active and using our facilities? So that was part of our quarterly perception survey, which shows a very active district with 93.4% using facilities at least monthly, and by far the majority, 65% at least on a weekly basis. And I guess very few on a never. And the second measure was around satisfaction. So are people actually satisfied with what there is on offer in our beautiful district? And 86.3%, that's the change over time, 82.8% are very satisfied or satisfied, with only 2.8% not satisfied. And we also asked a supplementary question, which was, how has your satisfaction changed over time in terms of is other facilities improving, staying the same, and so on? So 86.3 said that it was either the same or better than the prior year. Again, we have no comparison to the prior quarter for this, but the numbers are looking positive. We will have a quarterly comparison next time. Okay, the vibrant city heart. Our inviting and thriving inner city reflects our unique heritage and lakeside location. So the primary measure for this 2030 goal is around, actually I'll jump to it, is around people on the street. And that's what we've used for the most part traditionally as a measure of the overall vibrancy. This has traditionally been measured around an annual event with the Property Institute, counting in spring. In fact, actually this week is that second count happening. What we're doing is doing this now on a quarterly basis, so we actually get some more timely results around that, and we can track it more closely. So we went out and replicated that same survey, same methodology, same locations, etc. In winter, and then we don't have last year's prior winter results, but we did put them next to spring just to see how they would stack up, expecting them to probably be slightly less than spring, because winter is a traditionally less busy time of year. And in fact, they were actually up slightly higher than the spring numbers from last year. So that was looking positive. So the next time we bring it to you, we will be able to compare spring this year versus spring last year. And the second measure we have is around retail spend, which has been up 4.6% for the year to June, and that's an increase of 17.5 million, and that is compared to the New Zealand overall increase in retail spend of 2.8%. So again, tracking well ahead of the New Zealand average. So I think looking pretty positive for the Vibrant City Heart goal of 2030. Business innovation and prosperity. So the overall prosperity, business prosperity of Rotorua is measured by gross domestic product. I think there was some of this was in the news just recently, in the fact that definitely tracking very well in terms of our quarterly result was the top result across the country for this measure for the quarter to June. So we were up 4.3% versus a national average of 2.9%. So absolutely we want to keep an eye on that and keep on hopefully seeing some similar types of results. So that was obviously very, very good, very positive. Visitor nights has been selected as our secondary measure for business innovation and prosperity, given the, I guess, importance of the visitor industry to our district and the high, I guess, a strong growth outlook that we see in that space, which is also on track with visitor nights for the quarter to June up 9.9% versus the New Zealand average of 4.1%. Okay, employment choices. Up-to-date personal income figures are quite difficult to find, but there is on interest.co.nz, they do a report on a monthly basis, but looks very specifically at the median take-home pay for the 30 to 34 age group, and that's, I guess, their purpose is around looking at that in the context of housing affordability, but it does provide us an ability to look at our local statistics versus national statistics. And for that, I guess we've moved in line with the rest of New Zealand at 1.9%. But I did check that against inflation as well, and that is much higher than inflation for the period, which was around about 0.5%. So overall, I guess people's incomes are at this point increasing higher than the comparable rate of inflation for the same period. Second measure we have is around the unemployment rate. So if we look at the year to June 2015, our unemployment rate is 7.9%, which has fallen by 0.4 percentage points. So the improvement for our district, albeit as we do have a higher rate than many other districts, but our improvement has been higher than the national average. So nationally, the overall rate fell by 0.1 percentage points, and we've fallen by 0.4 percentage points, which is obviously a good thing. Okay, and the last one is enhanced environment, which we've marked as being of some concern. This one we've also measured 4 different measures rather than just the 2, because it does encompass many different factors. So we've looked at air quality, so the number of breaches in our ambient air quality standards for the year. So there's been a big improvement this year. There are seasonal factors that come into play with this, but overall our improvement has been I guess a 55% improvement, so from 20 breaches in the year to 2014 to just 9 in the year to 2015. So that's tracking in the right direction. We've also looked at just the overall satisfaction with the appearance and the cleanliness of the district, because our 2030 goal talks about being known globally for being a clean and natural environment, which a lot of that can be reflected in how people feel in terms of how well our district is maintained, in terms of when they're here, what they see, even just things like rubbish, tidiness, quality of our infrastructure and so on. So as part of that same perception survey, we asked the question in terms of satisfaction with the appearance and the cleanliness of the district. And 83% are satisfied or very satisfied. And we have 6% of people who are either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. And then the final set of measures is 2 around lake water quality. So we've got the accepted best practice measure is around the trophic level index for lake water health. And so I think just this last week, Bay of Plenty have released their latest 3-year rolling average figures, which are the ones that they like to use in terms of giving the clearest indication. And in that they have 1 lake is declining, which is Lake Tarawera, and they have 5 lakes needing further investigations because there's some figures in there, that are they look at multiple measures and maybe 1 or 2 of those are looking in the wrong direction and it requires more investigation. So 2 lakes improving and 4 lakes stable, but overall we've said that's still a concern given our lakes are a part of who we are. They're very iconic for our district, and obviously we're working. There's many programs around looking to improve our water quality. The other measure we did include was the number of health warnings, so which is a very visible thing to our community and to our visitors in terms of the health of our lake, is whether or not we have health warnings in place. And that, I think, for that quarter is decreased from 2 to 1, so a minor change for the period. So in conclusion, this is our, I guess, our first effort to bring to you a view of how we're tracking against our 2030 vision, which is driving and guiding our overall strategies, and our, I guess, an effort to monitor and then be able to respond and adjust actions accordingly, and to have a holistic view against all the measures that we've identified with the community that are important to us. And I think it's looking really good. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Amy. Whilst it is really good that we've got this chart, I think this should be shared with the public in some formal way. Just a couple of the areas is with the homes column, whilst you've looked at ECA and you've looked at the value of new housing starts, I just wondered another indicator on the wealth and well-being of the community would be the rents, and how rents have risen in terms of take-home pay. Whilst the take-home pay's gone up, on the other side of the equation, the rents have grown considerably in the last 6 months. So I just, from an affordability point of view, I think that would be a good indicator. And the other one in the business innovation and prosperity area, maybe the consumer price index would be also a strong indicator for Rotorua, because that also gives you inflationary trends and all those sorts of things. And the last one, the air quality, was picked up to the end of June. I mean, that's just the beginning of winter. July, August is when all the breaches usually occur, so next measure will certainly show a huge decline, because I understand it's at the highest levels it's been at the moment. So I think that would be a better indication next time round. Are there any questions? Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your report. I've got basically sort of 3 questions. The first one is in terms of the unemployment rate. Whilst it's good to see that we've had a reduction, how does that compare with nationally, please?
Good question.
So the national unemployment, so that's gone down 0.1%. Do we have the figure of what?
No, we don't have that. The only other ones I've got here is the number of job seekers.
I can provide it to you after, Councillor Kent. I think it's in the order of 7, it was around about that, but it is lower than our figures.
Can I suggest it would be very helpful to
have the actual rate as well as the change.
Thank you.
No problem.
The second one is, I'm not sure whether it's quite under the Vibrant City Heart or the business innovation and so on, but one of the measures that we did determine was we were going to measure the reduction in empty shops. And I don't see any figures relating to that measurement, and I think you can go further than that in terms of sort of new business startups and close downs. Perhaps you could look at that for future report levels to give us some feedback as to how that's tracking.
If I may, we did discuss that at the workshop in December, and in terms of trying to limit the number of measures. I think that one is listed in terms of the 2016 priority, and will on an annual view be looked at for that. I think is it overall, how's it against the 2016 priorities, similar to what we did I think in February this year. That will be replicated again. For the quarterly view, we tried to keep it to 1 or 2 measures. So if you're suggesting that it would be preferable to have that versus retail spend, for example, then that could look at that.
Well, it would be more meaningful to Rotorua, because retail spend basically is a national trend as much as anything else in the number of tourists coming into town. So I think it would be more helpful. And finally,
just you're absolutely right. That was a strong economic indicator that we did want a measurement on. So I think that's taken on board as part of the 2016 goals. So we'll get Amy, will we get an update on the 2016 goals as well?
The plan is to do that. On an annual basis. So there was the report that was done earlier this year that was mailed out to all of our ratepayers and that we talked about, and that we will replicate something similar to that at a similar period, beginning of next year. So that will definitely be in there. In terms of getting quarterly figures, I guess the retail spend is very important to our core groups in there, which is our retailers in terms of are we spending in their city, and that's affected by whether people are spending outside of that Tanakai Street, which is obviously to the mall or to the outskirts of our district, or in fact going to Tauranga or online and so on. So it is important that we are tracking what is the retail spend, particularly within that Tanakai Street spine for where we're trying to revitalise, versus just saying it's not just a total district spend, which does, yes, move with, other movements. So.
Thank you. And my final question relates to when the 2030 vision was first conceived. The primary concern of all councillors was that we turn this into a cost-effective and efficient council. I don't see any measurements along those lines in terms of what you're reporting. Perhaps you could look to that for the future, please.
That's not stated as a 2030 goal. It is one of the 2016 priorities, so that would come through, I guess, in terms of the 2016 annual report. And I know that we are working on a broader internal dashboard in terms of our performance, which would consider other financial metrics and efficiency and things like that. But this very much is around the 7 goals that we talk with our community about in terms of where we want to be in 2030. What do we want our district to look like?
And based on the report we got earlier, it looks like we're right on track to be a cost-effective council. Councillor Hunt.
Just wanted to make a comment that I think this is a very easy to read format for the community. It's certainly at a glance people can see where we're going, and I think that it will stimulate quite a lot of debate out there in the community. I just remind, under our commitment is the working in a cost-effective, so that is covered as part of a commitment to all of the things we do here. It's all on our desk pads in front of everybody if they want to see it, the Rotorua 2030, so it is highlighted there. I don't see its value in here. I think the recognition of having fewer but more meaningful markers for our community is where we've arrived at. Yes, a bit of tweaking can be had, but I think that this is a very good start, and I'm very, very pleased with it. Thank you.
Well done. Good to see some positives there. Can I just ask, the perception survey itself is carried out by the people listed right down the bottom, I see, including council staff. Is that correct?
The perception survey is carried out by APR Consulting. That was done through a tender process. So we went out to tender for that, and APR won that tender. So they're doing that. And then in terms of the pedestrian count, we did use council staff for the quarterly one in terms of to replicate that. But we are actually looking to change that to hopefully with CCTV cameras we'll be able to do that count for us in the future, so we're not spending too much staff time standing on the corner counting people.
I was going to mention the CCTVs. We'll solve that one. So we used to have 1 perception survey per annum. Now we're having 4. Is that correct?
We are having 4 for this purpose, so we went out to tender and said definitely there's the 4. There's still the NRB broader, which is much broader, much more in detailed survey, which is done on an annual basis. And in addition to that, we do still have a separate safety survey, which is required. Well, we use, but also the police use, and various members of the community use, in terms of again diving into more detail in terms of where our hotspots and issues around safety and so on. So. And
lastly, Amy, the margin of error, is there a factor included here?
For the APR report, for their perception survey, it was plus or minus 5%.
I guess for cost reasons, we tried to keep the sample relatively low, and also just in terms of the frequency that we're doing it, so that does impact that.
Mr. Chairman, what you put up on the screen and what you've given us in this document is the same, but what you've given us in the councillor's book is different. So have you made certain you've deleted the councillor's information one because it's difference on the water quality? On our report it shows that there's 2 lakes which are declining and 4 lakes which need further investigation.
That was the one you've got in your report is the one in error, and that's been replaced because the Bay of Plenty just released the finalised figures, and we very quickly got the presentation changed. Yes, the one on the screen and the loose one is the updated one, and those details are on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website now. They weren't before when we had to go finalise everything.
Okay. What I was just getting at was make certain that the correct one's on the website, not
Yes,
the wrong one.
absolutely.
Now, my other question is, on water quality, on the second one from the bottom, it's got water quality I. It's a little bit, to me, it's a little bit confusing. You've got Q1 2014, Q1 2015, Q2 2014, Q2 2015, Q3 2014, and Q4 2014. Should those questions be there, or should they be answered better? Because you've just got one question above it, but it's very difficult to relate which one relates to which question.
Sorry, that was quarter one. So we've tried to put the quarters next to each other because it is seasonal. So you've got quarter one 2014 next to quarter one 2015, showing that they're equal, and quarter two 2014, and then quarter two 2015, it's halved. Just really because it's quite difficult to show the ones that are seasonal, because if we just did it as a graph in time, it's actually quite hard to see how one quarter matches another. So we'll think about how we label that one for next time.
The questions, Councillor Donaldson finally, and then we'll put the motion.
Yeah, not a question, Mr Chair. I'd just like to say how pleasing the report is to receive, that Council can't take all the credit, but can take credit for showing leadership and working with the community, and this shows a considerable input by our steering groups and the portfolio groups, and I think it's very, very encouraging going into 2016, so it's a pleasure to see.
Councillor Donaldson, I completely agree. I think you've highlighted the fact that we cannot take all the credit, but I think, Amy, you and your team, in terms of collaboration, for example, getting the home installation, the collaboration required to achieve those results is massive across a whole lot of different groups. Likewise with the outstanding places to play and many of the other indicators, Councillor Donaldson. So I think all in all it's a good result. It's steady as she goes, but when we get the next reports to see how we're progressing in terms over time, will certainly give us some indications as to whether we've been successful with the 2016 and the 2030 goals. I've got a mover in a second, haven't I? Enough. Oh, didn't we? Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Seconded, Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you, staff, for a wonderful job. Next one is the Waipa Horse Paddock Reserve, commonly known as that, out at Waipa, and approval of a lease. Would someone like to move recommendation 1? Thank you, Councillor Sarank. Seconded, Councillor Tapsell. All those in favour, please say aye. I think it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of we've certainly had this before us before, but this is now bedding down, Rob, the actual detail. So if you'd like to take us through that, and we'll answer any questions after Rob is finished. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou, Council. Robbie's just handing out, basically what's happened is we have become aware of a later submission to accompany the agenda item you've got. It's come from Timberlands. It does raise some concerns about access in regard to a right-of-way to the horse paddock area, but fundamentally I don't believe that it changes the intent of the agenda item that you've got. It's just some matters that we would actually have to deal with in terms of setting up some of the legal implications around the lease. So I think it's actually just more of a technical matter than anything else. So yes, you'll see it's all pretty well explained in the agenda. It's probably best that I let Robbie go through just a few of the key points for you. and then we're happy to take any questions after that.
Good morning. In terms of the report, we're basically seeking Council's endorsement of allowing a lease on a recreation reserve. This will be completed under delegated authority, so it's a little bit different to how we would normally do it in terms of going to the Department of Conservation afterwards. So the normal process would be for Council to approve the lease and then we'd go to the Department of Conservation. At this stage, we don't have to do that anymore because the Minister of Conservation has now delegated that authority to the councils, so they can make those decisions for their reserves within their communities. So the report states that the first section, the recommendation, is just to allow us to put a lease on the reserve. The second section is a recommendation is for us to offer that lease to the BMX club. And the period of 20 years is important because as staff, we can only offer a 10-year lease. So any leases that have to be longer than 10 years, we have to bring back to council as well for the endorsement. So we're proposing a 20-year lease to the BMX club, 2 10-year terms. The amendment that I've put in front of you won't materially affect those recommendations. What it will do is, as Rob has said, we'll put the onus on us to include certain conditions in the lease document to mitigate the concerns raised by the submitter.
Mr. Maxwell, question I have is in terms of tenure and being able to secure buildings and funding for buildings, etc., and the actual track itself, would the club not need longer, like 3 lots of 10? I mean, 20 years is not a long period of time.
Under the Reserves Act, we can only grant a 32-year term in total.
Yeah.
So that means that we can't grant any renewal or right of renewals past a 32-year term. Most banks for mortgages and so on look favourable at a 20-year term, we've found, for other clubs. And so we would be applying that same philosophy here, that if it's acceptable for a bank, then it would surely be acceptable for other funding agencies.
As long as that assurance is given, because I wouldn't want to see them falling over in terms of security of tenure if they then have to come back to us for another 10 years.
In terms of our leases, we don't tend to cancel our leases. We've probably had people leasing council reserve for 30 or 40, 50 years even, and it's just been a rollover of 10-year periods in the past. So essentially you can almost say that once they're there, unless something catastrophic happens or alters in terms of the club, they could be there for the next 100 years.
Question of clarity, Mr. Chairman. So these amendments that we've just been given now, they do cover Tricia's points on 19, 20 and 21 of her submission? So it's the right-of-ways and
we do have we do have a heads of agreement with Red Stag around the right-of-way currently. We're working through the legalities of actually implementing the conditions in those agreements.
Okay.
So in terms of the traffic management situation, at the moment where they are in Senatorium Reserve with the BMX track, Council's taken a bit of a hands-off approach for their events that they hold there. With the move to Waipai Valley, we will have to be more involved in managing that events so that the impact is managed in terms of the entire Waipai Valley.
Yes, thanks through you, Mr. Chairman. Just a bit of clarification also around this late submission from Congarau Timberlands. I'm struggling to see what their issue is in raising, because it's not shown on this map, raising the Mill Bypass Road. I don't see it on these maps or how it affects this particular issue. What's the concern there?
What Congarau Timberlands have done is they've, as part of the submission, have also included a copy of their submission to the district plan. And so that's the second part. So their actual submission is the first page in a bit that goes up to number 11. The second part is what they've submitted is in support of the submission, if you will, and that's what they gave to the district plan hearings.
Can I just add too that the concerns they have over a right-of-way of Waipa State Mill Road it's quite a dynamic environment. What's happening out there at the moment with Red Stag as well, and there may well be changes to the actual layout of roading out there that absolves some of the concerns that Kaingaroa Timberlands Limited have. So that's why, while we recognise those concerns, but we need to actually just put the whole big picture layout on it and then see how it fits and then how that might affect the formal legalese of the lease document that we need to set up.
I think we'll just have a bit further discussion before I take your motion. In terms of clause 21 of the information we've been given to the last one, will that be factored in where it says, in conclusion, it is my submission that the correct legal position must be shown on the maps to avoid confusion over rights of use? The two rights of ways are not private roads and should be deleted from all maps. So is that an issue you're working through with Timberlands or Waipa? Or, I mean, we need to get these things right because public access and safety issues in that location, and I can understand Timberlands' angst in terms of the conglomeration of a whole lot of users in one thing. I mean, when you have some activities out there, there's thousands of people out there, and I'm sure that activities will not only be on the weekend when a lot of the logging matters down scale, even though it's a 24-hour mill, but you've also got to feel for a Red Stag and that they're trying to increase our economic activity, and they've invested hugely in establishing a new mill and etc. So new parts to the mill, I mean. So I think we need to tread very carefully, and we don't want a conflict between the recreational use and the commercial and economic benefits to the community. I just wondered whether you guys were taking that into account.
We are taking that into account through, as I said before, we're going to have to put some specific conditions around, especially events at the BMX Club. I think when they had the Nationals here a couple of years ago, there was maybe up to 2,500 people attending. We cannot support that, or at least allow the club to engage in that kind of activity without support from council in some form. It just simply won't happen.
Thank you, Chairman. With regard to item 11 on the supplement that you handed out, Rob, their concern is with regard to traffic management, and I would be, having been out there, taking kids out there for a ride over the weekend, the traffic is absolutely phenomenal, and with the addition of this little BMX track, it's going to be even more congested, and that traffic management, who is going to put that in place and who's going to pay for
it? The situation with the council and Red Stag, who own the road, is that we've signed a heads of agreement to get access easements over the road. Now, Kaingaroa Timberlands is another party that has an access easement over the road, so they're an affected party to the relationship the council is setting up with Red Stag. In terms of traffic management, Red Stag have recognised that traffic out there is an issue and are looking at a much bigger project to try and remove the recreational traffic from the commercial traffic. So that's a target that Red Stag and the council have gone into a heads of agreement with trying to do. Now, in terms of then managing the recreational traffic, we would be putting conditions in terms of permits for events and things like that for the event organisers to take care of traffic management. So it's a sort of it's a three-way split almost. We're trying to take separate the recreational and the commercial, and then also we'll have to manage that other side of the recreational as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in respect to your earlier comment that we need to, there needs to be management of the impact of recreational on economic activity in the forest. Just highlight now that the Economic Growth Portfolio Strategy team, who also sit across sport and recreation, are engaging a new survey, or undertaking a new survey to get a clear picture, because we have pressure from the likes of Red Stag, who are the landowners in the Waipa Valley, for all of the information around recreational. So you've got forestry economic, and you've got recreational economic happening in that forest, as well as community recreation. So we're trying to get a handle on that picture, because there are a number of business interests calling for that sort of information, and it's becoming quite debatable whether forestry, whether whakarewarewa forest from Longmile to Rotorua is in fact going to realise more from commercial forestry as from commercial recreation. So we're trying to get a handle on that picture and provide get a clear platform for making future decisions going forward. So it is a big issue, and it's one that we're sort of grappling with right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to suggest that we just add to point 3, subject to satisfactory resolution of rights of access issues raised by submitters, and I think then we're totally covered, and we're giving the authority to staff to negotiate as is needed. And on that basis, I'd be happy to second the motion.
Actually makes sense. Robbie, are you guys quite happy with that minor amendment? Could you just read it out again, Rob, please? So,
subject to satisfactory resolution of rights of access issues raised by submitters.
Raised by submitters. Make it general. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I'm happy with that, Mr. Chairman, because I know the BMX Project Steering Committee have all along said they're not in a position to press go on their project until they have access absolutely determined.
And that's going to be a multi-million-dollar investment in this community, and the tourism and economic development impacts of that is going to be off the chart, which is great. Someone else had their hand up. Oh.
Mr. Chairman, what I'm concerned about, the amendment which we just got, says, I quote, as on the front page, as part of the approval, Council will be party to any traffic management plan required. Now, most traffic management plans, if you have a bigger venue, you have to supply staff to direct traffic. In the case of a BMX as a world-class event, will Council be party to part of the cost from the traffic management organisation supplying staff to manage the traffic around the area?
The issue Timberlands is raising, and what I've read of this, is on a permanent basis, so that they could undertake the operations of a forest, wipe out the operations of a mill, and as Councillor Donaldson said, not cutting across either any of the activities, but allowing for each. And I think Councillor Kent's amendment, subject to satisfactory resolution to access rights raised by submitters, covers what you're talking about. I mean, I think there's a myriad of things that can happen under that, and as Councillor Donaldson said, the BMX Club will not press go on these until those issues have been resolved. I'm happy with to put the motion as amended. Is there any further discussion on that? Councillor Srank.
In regard to traffic management that Councillor Gould's brought up, the organiser of the event is totally responsible for that, and there are two very reliable companies in town who carry out that traffic management. So council staff itself do not get involved. only in the permit of it.
But from your experience on the Bay of Plenty Land Transport Committee, what this submitter, what WIPA and what BMX are saying they want satisfied is the permanent access is not compromised for either. But when there's an event on, Mark, that's the responsibility of each organiser. Thank you for clarifying that, Councillor Serang. Any other questions? I'm prepared to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against. We'll move to the operation report for August-September. Okay, thank you, Councillor Gould. Do I have a seconder? And we'll discuss the motion before we put it. Councillor Tapsall. JP Gaston is going to cover the strategy and partnerships groups. Dave Foster is going to cover the performance and delivery groups. And who's the other one? Thomas, you're up. Finance and Capability Group. And Monty Morrison is also here to cover the Kaitiaki group as well. We're in your hands, JP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably on page 36, councillors, just one point there to note, and it's obviously a topic of discussion and letters to the editor, was just around the number of councils involved in the online voting trial. So there's 8 identified there. We've received the information from the Department of Internal Affairs, DIA, which just gives us the checklist that we have to confirm before it is passed on to the Minister for consideration next year. So that's probably that one. Councillors, do you want me to just move through or take questions as we go through?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've raised this with JP before. Just some concerns about some of the online, although I think I'd like us to still go there, but just a couple of queries here. Whilst you say there's 8, really there's only 7 because Palmerston North's got its name in there twice. So there's, yeah, and the one that I have is I've been reading some of the concerns that some people have been raising and just taking note what's happening in other areas. And now that, because we voted on this and we were going to have a decision in November because we thought that Cabinet was going to make a decision in December. Now that they're going to leave it till February, I'm just wondering whether we should even hold ours back before that date, just in case some other things come up in the meantime. It's just a thought, especially I'm pleased that Wellington's in there and Palmerston North, but if for some reason they withdraw, I'd be kind of concerned then. So it's just some thoughts, Mr. Chairman.
To you, Mr. Chair, we've said a couple of times this has been raised, that there's been a working group in this space for a number of years, and also within that working group has been the 2 main elections providers. Now, obviously one of ours is Elections NZ. Now, they have been very much involved in this, and when it has been passed through to DIA have done their work and have established the various criteria that they feel need to be checked off around the website securities. Now that's the basis of supporting the Minister in making her decision around whether to proceed with the online trials. Mr. Dunn attended a meeting last week and again on confirming how progress is being made around those checklists, but really it's those 2 main providers who need to provide that security confirmation to DIA and therefore to the Minister. The other group that was excluded from participating in the trial was Auckland. Now, Auckland was very keen to be involved, but again, because of their size, it really stops being a trial at that point, because you have a quarter of New Zealand's population involved in the trial. So they were sort of excluded. So they were still trying to take a look at what happens in other areas. So it is important, as you've stated, that Wellington's involved. But there has been a significant amount of work in the past, and as I say, DIA have been managing the criteria that need to be signed off to support the Minister's decision. So at this stage, we're just working with our provider, Elections NZ, to make sure those checks and that authorisation and checklist is confirmed before it's passed on to the Minister for her decision. My understanding, this is the whole. If you recall, our previous chief executive was involved in it for a number of years. So it was a steering group provided by local government. So around the elections process, it did involve the providers, and it did involve DIA as part of that process as well. So it did involve government directly, and as I say, they've set the criteria that need to be complied with for that assurance for government.
In the Te Arawa Partnership vote is currently using online, and I understand that nearly 30% of the votes have been cast online, and Election NZ is involved in that process.
Yes, they are.
Thank you. Councillor.
A further question on time frame that Councillor Maxwell covered. When do we expect it will come back to the table? Secondly, is there any change in so far that you know of in cost to this council? And thirdly, just what have we voted for? We haven't actually voted for online voting, have we?
You have, Councillor. My understanding is that you've accepted that we would notify DIA that we're part of the trial and we're involved in that trial. The decision that we would be bringing back to you probably at an O&M meeting is to confirm whether we have complied and we're comfortable that there's compliance through Elections NZ with the criteria being set by DIA. So that's the information we'll be bringing back to you, that we have complied, and that's information will be passed to DIA. So that's the only thing that we'll be returning to confirm with you.
Yeah, I'm starting to have some doubts, and I'm sensing it around the room that so we need to bring that back in terms of whether we did vote to definitely to go with the trial. I thought we were waiting for more information. We had the costings, we had and then people started pulling out, and there was some doubt. So you're quite adamant that we have voted to go down.
Yes.
The path.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Serang.
What we'll be returning through O&M, and probably just through this normal report, is to identify that the checklist has been complied with and that DIA has been notified. So that would be probably at the next of these meetings. Yes.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm filled with disquiet over this so-called decision to go ahead with this online. So much information has come to light since you did your presentation, which apparently resulted in a vote, that is detrimental to the integrity of the voting system, that I think even if we have voted on it, we should be reconsidering this decision to go with the online side of things. It's difficult enough to keep a track of postal voting, let alone this online stuff.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I was very clear what I voted for, and as we all were, because you needed expressions of interest to go forward to see if you had enough interest around the country for DIA and that committee to proceed. So that's what we voted for. I don't want to reconsider it. I think that looks like we're just wobbling all over the place. It may still change after DIA looks at the spread and the mix and concerns that DIA have asked to be answered. So we still don't know where it's going to go finally. I think you're absolutely right that we're watching the Te Arawa elections online. It's not causing huge concern.
I think we just hold fast until it's gone through the right government agencies and that right level of scrutiny and oversight from much bigger heads than us about security.
Your Worship, JP, just following on with a question about that. So really, if we have signed off that we did want to go with the online experiment, it's really not our decision, because unless the issues that Councillor Bentley and others have raised around it regarding security, and I have as well, unless government is happy with that, the trial will not happen.
Mr. Chair, absolutely, and that's been the whole point. Is they ask for expressions of interest. DIA and the government have been looking very, very carefully at it. They set the criteria around the online access that was required, so they'll get back those checklists from the various councils involved, and they will pass that information on to the Minister to say this appears in our view to be compliant, and the security protocols and the information and protections around the websites are adequate, and they will make the recommendation to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got major concerns over the security issues which have been raised to me since our meeting. I also have major concerns about the impact on increasing voter turnout, which have been raised since that issue, and I'm going to propose the motion right here and now that this issue comes back to Council for full consideration once all matters are able to be put before us to make a proper, informed decision that does not put this Council at risk.
I'm going to take your motion because that's direct against what we had already passed. What JP and what I'm hearing, and I think you'd be satisfied with this, Councillor Ken, that a decision by government is going to be made until February, and that issues regarding security that you're talking about, and I've had some of those directly sent to me. Mind you, some of them are in the Canadian experience, but I understand that. No decision is going to be made, although we've given an indication with those others that we want to be part of a trial. We budgeted $45,000 to be part of that trial. The decision is out of our hands in terms of, it is in our hands, because DIA and government and cabinet will be making a decision whether they can be assured that the security issues that you're talking about are covered, and if they're not covered, cabinet won't go ahead. So I think it would be premature to take your motion at this stage. I think what we need to do that is maybe before Christmas is a bit early, JP, because cabinet's not going to make a decision till February, as per your report. I just wondered is it appropriate that we review it maybe in January? Or should we wait until the government decide? Yeah, okay. Right. I'll give you the right... JP, would you like to comment, and then I'll give Councillor Kent the right to respond.
Mr. Chair, as I say, DIA has spent a number of years scrutinising the work of that working group on the election process. They came up with a criteria. They've asked councils to check the security against those criteria and through their providers. So we've got to make a report to DIA about our compliance with those criteria before Christmas, I understand.
Oh, okay.
So we can report to you at the next O&M, so before Christmas, that we've been through that and we are comfortable that we are, that we're complying with those criteria. Again, that will be passed to DIA, who will then look at the trial full stop. So whether all councils who have responded do meet that threshold, and it is a very high threshold that DIA has set in those criteria, and then they will be making the recommendation to the Minister.
I think, Councillor Kent, your motion should be at the next, when we've got that information. JP's given us an assurance we're not going to jump into bed with something that's got security issue problems, but at the moment government wanted an indication that there were councils out there that were prepared to take part in a trial, but the issues that you have raised, Councillor Maxwell's raised, and several of us around here have raised, that we wanted to be, pretty A1 with regard to the security. That's what you've raised this morning. until those matters have been dealt with, we're not going with any trial. That's how I understand it. Is that where you're thinking, JP?
Through Mr Chair, I suppose reiterating again, we have taken the decision that we have put up our hand to say, yes, we will participate in the trial. Now, the acceptance of us involved in the trial, and the first step in that acceptance and being part of the trial is that we can comply with the checklist that's been supplied to us by DIA. Yes.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm quite happy for this to be raised further down the track, but I think it is extremely important to this council that it should be raised because a lot of information has come to our notice subsequent to our initial assessment of a report, and the things that we've seen since weren't included in that report upon which we based that original decision. So I think it is the only prudent thing to do to actually reconsider once we have all the facts before us.
The matter regarding voter security and the online trial because I don't want it to fall off. It's an action that we need to have an update on at the next round of meetings. So I just... It won't fall off. It won't fall off. Okay, cool. You happy with that, Councillor Kent? Councillor Gould, I'm indulging because I was going to put the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Page 36, you've got the 4.1.2, final decision on the model will be made at the council meeting on 12th of November, and yet you've got the cabinet expects to make a final decision on the trial in February. Is we going to get the two to marry up, or is one going to be before the other?
If you've been listening to we've been discussing that. What JP had advised us is that we had to be happy with some of the parameters that had to go to DIA. DIA is an agency for the government. Their report will go to Cabinet, and Cabinet will make a decision as to whether the trial goes ahead or not. If our issues that DIA, Department of Internal Affairs, have raised with JP aren't satisfied, JP will bring a report back to us to say, no, we can't guarantee those security issues that Councillor Kent raised, so we should withdraw from the trial. That's how I understand it. Is that correct?
Through Mr Chair, I think it's automatic. If we can't comply with the conditions set by DIA, we will not be eligible to proceed with the procedure. And I think the key thing here, and Councillor Gould is also referring to the item above, which is the decisions around the representation review. So that's obviously the process about number of councillors, wards and community boards that have been out for public consultation. So that will be a decision about the composition of council. The next item is how people can and are able to vote.
Have you got that? So you mixed it up. God. Okay. Online voting, we've covered that. Okay, JP, any more?
Just a couple of extra, Council. Maybe probably on page 37, just under the public relations heading there, just identified there as the reach of some of the video clips that have been posted through our Facebook page there. Just reference then to the decision about Taniwha Springs that had a reach out to 7,700. So that's the shares and views. So it's that ripple-on effect. And the reference there to the video clip by Lucy and Kuratea were about the City Focus. So they went down and visited City Focus, and through the Youth Council just made a little video about the different options. So that's obviously been shared and retweeted and repassed on 3,200 times as well. So significant reach in that sort of space there as well. Council, just down the bottom under strategy headings there, there's references there to a number of bylaw reviews. So we've indicated previously the really significant agendas we have for November and into December as well. So that's referencing some of those. I can give a district plan update in the confidential section, so we'll come back to that one. And probably the other one is just to talk about on page 38, We've had some market research undertaken, which is just going to help us develop this business attraction strategy. So that will be some work also coming back to you at a later date, but just signalling some of that research has been undertaken there as well. And probably in the middle of the page, and Councillor Tapsell might want to make some comments about this. We've had a hugely busy couple of days around the Youth Voices project on the 14th and 15th, and so a number of the strategy team were involved in taking some minutes and assisting with writing up some of the decisions out of that process, which has been, I think, hugely beneficial for everyone involved.
Thank you, JP, for mentioning that. I will give a few words. So last week we kind of filled this council with the Future Leaders Forum, which was a result of the Youth Voices group, which is a group of 30 young people that have been engaging with thousands of people from the community. And they thought, well, let's get young people themselves into council to build their leadership skills, connect with council, and most importantly, feedback into our draft strategies. So it was an excellent 2 days. The young people themselves got a lot out of it. Many of them are now much more interested in local government and politics, and are now connecting their, going back to their schools and connecting students with issues too. So we've been very fortunate to have young people feedback directly into all of the strategies, and a lot of them really appreciated the help and support from staff themselves. We had staff from the portfolios and our assistants and executives there to assist and also to hear back on the feedback. So thank you so much. It was much appreciated, and we now have 60 young people within our community that are more empowered to be leaders. Thank you.
Just other than we're delighted with the work that's been going on. We have obviously a very successful opening of the Green Corridor, and the intersection upgrades are moving well. And the feedback we're getting, there is a report coming on the Tulip Festival, and the stats from that are actually mind-boggling. We certainly had a sell-out of accommodation for the first weekend of the school holidays that the Tulip Festival was on, and it way exceeded all expectations of attendance, of Facebook hits, of reach, and we had our debrief yesterday, so we're looking forward to that becoming one of the major iconic events for this city.
Jelly sides, you were happy with the Tulip Festival. Great. Your Worship the Mayor.
Yes, I just a couple of congratulations to Councillor Tapsell for the youth leaders.
Yeah.
I think that was fantastic. We've never seen young people crawling over this place like I've seen from the photographs. And also a vote of thanks to the committee for the Tulip Festival. There were 16 events around that. 60, yeah, and they just worked so hard. And the accolades back were overwhelming. So it would be nice if the committee got our wider council feedback. Just one other issue, great interest emerging even just this morning about the Children and Library Hub, and people wanting to see the concept plans when they're a bit more finalised, and where could we show those. People want to walk through the plans, not just the picture now, which is great. Good interest, but still some concerns that are out there until they see the final concept design. So it would be great if they'd be perhaps down in the foyer or somewhere so people can come and just quietly walk through it to see where we're settling there.
Because I had someone have a shot at me the other day saying, "What are you doing to our library, cutting it in half? It's full now," So I totally agree that we need to not sell the issue, but show the benefits of it, not only from a health point of view, but from an education point of view. Thank you. Who's next? Sustainable Living, which is Councillor Weber. She's absent at the moment. And you'll see how successful our drink fountains are there. And last Friday I went to the blessing, and thank you, Mr. Morrison, for coming up and helping us with the blessing at the Mamaku Youth Park. And Gary Pavitt, remember the guy who sat in front of us? And Councillor Rankel, remember this because I know she vociferously supported the two young girls who came to us 4 or 5 years ago, they were actually there, and those girls are now 19 and 20, and they actually spoke and were delighted that something that they'd started with the Ratepayers Association had come to fruition. And they're really looking forward to stage 2, which is the development of the BMX park on the other side. And they actually had standard 3 and standard 4 kids. I can't remember what year that is, I'm a bit old-fashioned. They actually got on the microphone and talked about what impact it has had on their community in terms of pride, the fact that they, and special accolades went out to Mark Speicherbosch for the coordinating the artwork up there. If you're ever going on the way to Hamilton or Auckland, do a detour up the Danzy Road. It'll take you 2 seconds to have a look at what has been designed up there, and to Rob Pekethley, Gary and the staff done a fantastic job. So Puketewhero Park's next, and I see the toilets progressing at the moment. So that's all I've got on sport and recreation. You can see our drinking fountains, which has been a collaboration between myself and Councillor Wepper's sustainable living portfolio, is taking shape, and they will be going up progressively over the next 10 or 12 months. Okay. Right. Thank you, JP. Dave Foster's happy here to talk about the performance and the delivery group.
Indeed. Councillors, are you happy for me to remain here, or would you rather I move to there? Councillor, I won't go through everything in here, but I will just raise some of the things that I think are highlights. There's an awful lot of highlights. One of the things that amazes me is actually just how busy the team are working through issues. So in waste, of course, you know where we're at with the land disposal issue. So there was a presentation to you in terms of solid waste. Again, there was a presentation to you quite recently in terms of the work that's going on in terms of contracting that work out. You'll notice from the report the museum is incredibly busy. So the increase in tourist numbers is flowing through into the museum. And on top of that, of course, the RSA collection moving in there has taken a considerable amount of work from that team, actually getting it all identified, packed away nice and safely. Still quite a bit of work for them to do in regards to that in terms of documenting it and so on. So they're a really busy group at the moment, and one of the things that if we continue the way we're going, that we're going to have to reflect on over the next sort of 8 or so months is actually going to be the resourcing requirements into there. You'll see also from the report, and Thomas mentioned it earlier, that their revenue is quite ahead, significantly ahead of their forecasts. And again, that reflects the volume of people that are going through there. Consenting and compliance teams, again, very busy. The economic upturn, of course, is having an impact on there. Increased numbers of limbs, increased numbers of building consents, inquiries also going on into there as to what people can do with their properties and subdivision elements. So again, a very busy group. One of the things I would highlight, and you can see it in the library report, but I'll raise it separately from the library report. One of the things that we've been working on is actually what our education program looks like, our community education program looks like. And we had a bit of a concern that it was potentially quite disparate. So Monica from the waste sustainability area is actually leading the council services in terms of a combined approach. So what we're doing now is actually we're getting school classes coming to our facilities, and at that time they're running through issues around the library and what the library services are. Dog safety, so our dog control officer goes with them with his dog so that they can see the dog, pat the dog, learn how to approach a dog, what not to do in terms of when you approach a dog, those types of things. Also covering things like solid waste sustainability, recycling and water conservation. So that's going quite well in terms of the numbers of schools that are going through there. And what it does is it actually makes it a reasonable period for a class to be out of the class rather than us going to multiple classes at different times and in different areas. So that's actually going quite successfully at the moment. The other thing that, in terms of that, is actually around the levels of support that the different teams are providing to the things that are going on. So we talked about the number of events around the Tulip Festival. One was the library had a colouring contest around the Tulip Festival, and that was very successful. There were about 220 entries into that, and that covered under 12s, 12 to 17s and 17 plus. So there were quite a lot in terms of adults who went into it. And interesting observation in that, I don't know whether you're aware, but actually the biggest selling books these days are actually colouring in books for adults. And the guy who gave the presentation, who's a chap called Martin, who does these books, gave a fabulous presentation of prizes to people where he actually outlined the skill set that went into doing these, and it was actually a very, very good event, very successful. The other one, of course, is we've got the library supporting the issue that the program that the museum had a couple of weeks ago around the Karearea, where Ruud Kleinpast came, and the library were there with books in terms of, identify the bugs in here and the bug in the book, and that was quite a successful program again with both parties coming into that. Sport and rec, again very busy, and some of the stuff that you'll see going on in that program taking up quite a bit of resource around the Waipa, the Tulip Festival program, and of course change of seasons, having a big impact in there. So roading, our capital spend was identified as being quite low. What we've got in those areas is both roading, water, and parks and rec. The first quarter, of course, is winter. Okay, they are actually some of our coldest months, so we don't do much in there. What's been happening in there is they've been doing the work in terms of the design that's required, the tender documents, the procurement process has all been worked through so that we can hit that stuff quite strong into the construction season. So, as I say, it's always a slow start for us because of the seasonality of the work, but on track to deliver the program and within the funding envelope. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair.
I have, firstly, Dave, getting a number of complaints regarding the great ride Te Araahi, that it has gravel all over it, it's unpassable. That's the one, it's not the one that we've provided, it's the one going out towards Taupo, and it's overgrown and people are slipping on. They're not wanting to use it. So I've had 3 complaints about that, and the other one is I thought I'd go out because I know it needs to go on the action plan as well. The rural cell extension criteria has to come back to this committee. But I went out and I'd never been down a Moore Road. I was out at Mamaku at the opening of the children's thing. So after that, I went down and had a look at a Moore Road, and I honestly don't know how those people live there with the dust and I still haven't had my car cleaned, and it's an absolute mess. And I went right down the end of the road to the facility that we all help fund, or the Rotary Energy Charitable Trust help fund, and there were hundreds of people down there. So I think Councillor Srank and I did raise the issue, why did Moore Road jump the hurdle? I believe there's 2 new houses down there, so that would push the criteria up anyway. But the priority program has to come back because we need to signal, we've always signalled in advance, 3 years in advance, what roads we were going to do. So that should go on the action sheet. Well, okay. Rob, can you address the Te Araahi?
In terms of Te Araahi, it is council administered. It was funded through a subsidy from New Zealand Cycle Trails. That subsidy lapsed for 12 months. We've now put it back in our work program, so we do have the resources to put back into it. So there was a period where not a lot happened, but we're back onto it now, and so I suppose if there's any complaints that you're receiving, we would appreciate them directly so we can target the areas that need the fix-ups. Yeah. Okay, so that's the footpath alongside tree areas. Yeah, I mean those are. We have contractors who should be looking after that for us, so we need to just get onto that. Yeah.
Just going to respond, Mr. Chair. I rode the cycleway from pretty much Tamaki Village back to Waipa on Sunday, and it was in excellent condition. So the contractors have clearly been at work. What's not so great is the, as we discussed at an earlier meeting, the fly tipping out there, but there is a plan underway, so that's going to be addressed, and Timberlands are involved along with a whole bunch of volunteers, so there's a plan underway to address all of that.
Question, Rob, while you're in the seat, about the capital works. You've got the boat ramps at Hannah's Bay, but I remember the ratepayer group asking, or the chair of the ratepayer group out there, asking about a conservation plan for erosion of the foreshore. Has that work been completed?
No, it hasn't. We've got Hannah's Bay has got a raft of issues with the wetland as well.
Yeah.
So we basically are trying to organise a meeting with the two groups out there. There's the ratepayers group as well as the wetland restoration group. The regional council and Wildlands, our contract consultants, are doing that. So that's on the schedule to get that meeting, and as part of that, that's going to look at both the wetland and the lakefront.
Great, as one.
You're on track with the new one at Rotorua, the floating one? Or?
Yes, well, the Rotorua situation is the launching on the beach beside the constructed ramp, and we've talked to the Lakes Community Board and initiating a process. We obviously need a consent to do that, so we've kicked that off with people out there in terms of iwi, regional council, landowners, and the timeline is looking that we won't have something done before Christmas, but we hope to have something done soon after.
Okay, because it's the height of the season coming up, which is good. Councillor Gould?
Three things. One, with rural seal extensions, you got on page 48, got 140 k's of rural roads not currently sealed. If you do 4 k's a year, it's going to take you 35 years to seal them, which is a huge amount of time for the ratepayers using those roads. On page 47, the El Nino weather pattern, it is very severe. It's going to get a lot worse. You just have to travel between Taupo and Napier and just see it on the hills, how bad it is. And that's going to affect the farmers in the Rotorua region with the land getting very dry, and also be a very high fire risk, which means that perhaps the council should be looking at a different way of checking fires or improving them so that we can put them out a lot quicker than what we have in the past. And my other question is actually on page 40 with the Zen Centre. You're talking about a building warrant of fitness. Is that having a huge cost impact on the council, or does that mean that the building is unsafe, or does that mean that the building has to be looked at, or that it's proving a safety and health risk for people walking underneath the veranda?
Number of questions in there. I think in terms of the length of time to seal the rural roads, that's a decision that council made in terms of its LTP as to how much money you were going to vote into there. In regards to the El Nino patterns, then certainly they do have an effect, and our rural fire officer, Richard Horn, is aware of that. So he's already got elements in place around preparedness for that, as has rural fire around the country. So Richard works through with Stavros in regards to that and how it works. So it's not a thing we're unaware of. One of the things I would say, of course, is an El Nino pattern is sort of cyclic. It's not multiple years. So the El Nino prediction that they have now is sort of the level at the, I think they're predicting it'll be one of the worst since 1973-74. There was another pattern sometime in the 1990s, around about 95, 96, I think, going back in terms of what the memo said. So this will be the fourth of those. So it isn't an annual event that occurs. It's a sort of cyclic pattern, I think, which is somewhat unpredictable from what I can gather, but I may be wrong in terms of its predictability, in terms of how regular that cycle is. So it is a thing that's been monitored. The rural fire teams were made aware of that probably about more than a month ago, and are putting in place mechanisms to deal with that. And the final question was the Zen building and the building warrant of fitness. Well, I'll just go down the track generally in terms of building warrants of fitness. It's an element that certain buildings, depending on their use, require a building warrant of fitness, which is a self-certification process, effectively. When I say self-certification, the owner doesn't certify it. The owner has to get in qualified experts to sign off that issues in regards to the building. And again, there are issues that sort of come down to that safety that we were talking about before in terms of the building. So it's sort of safety around fire, emergency access, those types of things. Air conditioning are elements within it, access ways, those types of things. So that's in terms of council's work in it. Then that's actually what happens. It comes in with a self-certification. What we do is ensure that a warrant of fitness is in place.
Councillor Gould, you're entitled to raise things in a full council meeting, but particularly where they relate to one particular building, would send shudders down the community in terms of that, because that building has recently been purchased. That purchaser has some huge economic plans for that particular building. So I think if you've got questions on specific buildings like that, you should go direct to staff. It's okay. It's okay. Councillor Srank.
Chairman, I have a question on page 44 in regard to sport and recreation. During the school holidays, I was involved with 2 major hockey tournaments in Smallbone Park, where we had teams from all over the country. It was school holidays, so of course we had a large number of parents and families also attending. All the parking was taken up, both in the cricket and hockey area. We were absolutely flummoxed, but what we had to do, because outside on the road is a dotted yellow line, so you can't park on the road. So what we had to do was use the paddock behind the second water turf and between the cricket pavilion and the hockey pavilion. It is now a horrible mess, and it happens every year. It just becomes a mud pool. And all I'm asking is if some look can be taken at that area, and just to put some kind of metal surface on it. I'm not saying tar seal it, I know there's probably no budget for that, but at least, even on a Saturday, we haven't got enough parking. And that's where they park all the time. That's the only place left to park. I could cry, because across the road, where the rugby grounds are, there's parking for Africa, and nobody in them. So I just seek that some visit can be made and had a look at that area. It's not huge, but it was taking up to 40 or 50 cars.
Noted that. Thank you, Councillor Srank.
Okay.
And it's not only when you have a hockey tournament. I mean, it's even when cricket's on, and with the kids' JV. I mean, there is just a big demand for car parking. But thank you for raising that. It's really good. Councillor McVicker.
The Chairman, a couple of questions, if I may. Firstly, page 50, corridor planning. Can someone give me an update as to where we are with the Eastern Arterial with regard in particular to the spatial plan, as to the impact that is having on the future of the arterial route? Albeit I do see comments here, a strategic funding business case will determine the future. So where are we with the spatial plan, and secondly, Eastern Arterial?
Ross will come down to the front table to answer that for you. Thank you for raising that, Councillor McVicker.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. As Council is aware, we've been going through an iterative process together with NZTA and the local hapus with regards to the REA. We're having the next workshop on the 29th of October. I'm planning to invite NZTA and ourselves, obviously, to give an update on the status of that corridor planning to the SPF committee on the 4th of November. And then we'll have another meeting on the 19th of, workshop on the 19th of November with the intent of finalizing a broad direction which would basically say the capacity improvements on T9 have been investigated, and there are sufficient scope and opportunity to improve the capacity of T9 Road, which makes the REA designation, potentially superfluous to our future requirements. However, we need to go through the next two workshops, to get to that stage, and the New Zealand Board of Directors will authorize the New Zealand NZTA offices to utilize funds from the current National Land Transport Programme to implement improvements to the T9 roads as a medium and long-term stages. Now, with regards to the notion that once the designation is lifted, the question would be as to what is the possible use of land that is currently occupied by the designation. We're having, starting from tomorrow night, a partnership, workshop with the local hapus who control most of that, who own most of that land, or will own most of that land, to explore their desires and their wishes, and overlay that with the council's, growth agenda, and so we can make some cohesive and comprehensive sort of, decisions as to how we treat the future need for land development in that area, in Tina, on the Eastern Corridor. In parallel with that work on the Eastern Corridor, we will talk to the Council in the near future, specifically after the presentation to you, the briefing on the 4th of November, a formal request to NZTA to revoke the status of Amohau, street from a state highway, road to a local road. And of course, we will need to provide NZTA with a schedule of our wishes and desires as to how we want to see Amohau Street be converted in a way that will ensure, at least an acceptable traffic flow capacity, but at the same time to integrate Rotorua Central with our CBD area. So we're getting very close to the end game where, we will decide that Tinai and Amohau will be converted into different uses or increased capacities. And of course, associated with that, we have to make some decision as to how the land will be used in association with that.
Thank you. Two questions. The increase in demand with trucks into the new mill is substantial and putting a huge pressure on Vaughan's Road for a starter. Any movement there? And secondly, the spatial plan, are we still working on that at this point of time? And is it holding up the development of the Eastern Arterial?
I presume you mean the lumber cube mill, on our Rotorua land. We had some discussions with the developers and the landowners, last week, and actually we don't see any significant problem with the movement of the trucks because we will direct, heavy truck movement onto Vaughan and Marino and Tarawera because we want to put them into sort of control exit and entry points. Bear in mind that the Tarawera intersection will receive significant investment to improve its functionality and capacity. And obviously, in conjunction with that, we will do the necessary improvements on Marino Road to make sure that movement of trucks are appropriate for that location. Now, the second question is whether the spatial plan is progressing. Of course, we have a district plan at the moment, which has been agreed because given zones, and the specific discussion we're going to have with the HAPUS over the next couple of days, the next few weeks, obviously, it will be around the future use of that land that will dictate, what kind of functionalities and kind of uses we want down there, in view of the capacity we'll create on Tinai Road. So I think all these issues are deliberated in an integrated way, and we have to make sure that Tinai Road, for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 30 to 50 years, has got appropriate capacity, and functionality to serve the cities, the communities' development needs, as required.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just adding to what Stavros has said and probably trying to answer off Councillor McVicker's question as well, we had intended to do the spatial plan first, but as we've progressed through the conversations with NZTA that Stavros has been leading, it became clear that really we needed to get some absolute clarity about what was happening through that eastern corridor first, and then to start building the picture back up in the other direction. So where we had intended to say take a district-wide view from a spatial planning perspective and then drill down, we've actually decided that it needs to be reversed, and we've got to build up from our current issues around that eastern corridor first. So NZTA has been helping, as Stavros has said, around modelling some of their growth assumptions against the eastern corridor, and once we've identified those land aspirations in that area as well, that gives us a really good picture about what needs to happen within that corridor, and then that lifts up to a picture across the whole city. So we've just reversed the order, so the overall picture around the spatial plan will follow the more detailed view of what's happening specifically in that eastern corridor.
Project continues to progress. It seems to continue to progress regularly, and I just wonder where we are at this point of time, because it just seems to be dragging on and on.
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to either of them at the moment, but I'll probably get back to you.
Chair, I had a supplementary on the spatial plan, but I thought you were on to Rotorua. Yeah. Could just make a comment. What is unfolding makes a nonsense of where we were at with Invest Bay of Plenty, where Rotorua held the position that we were not going to complete a sub-regional spatial plan by June of this year, because we knew behind it we had to work out the Eastern Corridor. And so it has come to pass that we were absolutely right not to be forced to complete a spatial plan in June of this year, and it was within our interests, Rotorua's interests, that we do this in a staged approach aligned to the Eastern Corridor and the added pressures and the economic pressures and investment pressures that were coming on us. So I'm awfully glad we didn't buckle to fold into one regional spatial plan. We weren't ready, and it was always because of the Eastern Corridor. It's just a comment to remind us about when we're at that wider regional meetings, we've got to be careful we look after Rotorua's interests first.
Land, I know that about 80% of the land was purchased. I understood that land, you mentioned belonged to council, Stavros. I understand that it's owned by NZTA and has been purchased by NZTA.
The majority of the land that is currently under the REA designation, belongs to NZTA. That land was procured by NZTA in two forms, either under the Public Works Act or from a willing seller and buyer. Yeah.
No, they're not in our ASIC register. Okay. Now, Andy, you were going to answer a question
regarding
regarding.
Rotorua.
Yeah, there seems to be Councillor McVicker's comment was seems to be getting drawn out.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the negotiations are going very well and they're going very amicably. You may or may not be aware that there's been a recent Environment Court appeal overturn of the Matata wastewater scheme for the Whakatane District Council. That's a very similar position to what we're in now. You'll also remember that we're on the second time around here at Rotorua, so we're taking things very carefully, very cautiously. It's very amicable. The negotiations are going very well. But also that Environment Court overturn in the Whakatane district has also impacted on our negotiations as well. So we've got to make sure that we cross the T's and dot the I's on this here and make sure that the owners, represented by their iwi representation, are also behind the decisions that are being made. So we're taking this very carefully, very cautiously and very positively, I might say, but it is taking a little while to get there. Yes, we have. Yes, we have. We've got a meeting with the iwi reps, so the trustees, tomorrow, tomorrow afternoon, and we're hoping that may be the final negotiation, and then it will go back to the owners. So there's a lot of owners on the property. Go back to the owners for their approval and their support for that decision. So that final meeting we hope will be tomorrow afternoon.
So,
to be fair, in response to that, the effort that we're putting in now is being put in now to try and offset any
further down
aberrant.
So are you saying 2016 that we may start construction?
The program is for us to be completed with Rotorua in 2018. If necessary, Rotorua, which is a different subsidy. So the subsidy for Rotorua is Ministry of Health. That's where we've got the deadline for completion of the scheme, which is 2018. Rotorua is subsidised by Ministry for the Environment, which could be later if necessary, but I would see that the two schemes will go hand in hand as far as possible.
To earthquake improvements. Whilst we have budgeted for $20 million worth of earthquake improvements over the next 10 years, I believe that we were going to have an opportunity to review the parameters that we wish to implement in the future as to what percentage of the criteria that we need to go to. Where are we with an update on earthquake improvements?
So, yeah, Thomas, do you want to answer that? Or?
Thank you, Chair. The work that we're undertaking at the moment is planned for this building. It's pretty minor in the scheme of things. Of the significant work that we're programmed into the LTP, a report's currently being put together, which highlights each of the buildings, what the issues are, what work is required to be undertaken, where that will lift the NBS standard to, and then also bring to Council a policy with regards to our public buildings. Is do we want our public buildings to be at 80%, 67%, 100%? And once we've nailed that policy and we're aware, then decisions will be made on the work that to be taken on those buildings. But as I said, the work that's scheduled at the moment is pretty minor, strengthening on just the Civic Centre.
Thank you, Councillor McVicker. Finally, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to refer back to your question about bus stops on Fairy Springs Road, of which I did have a minor involvement at one stage.
Oh, okay.
The bus stop opposite what was Barker's Park, Council did approach the owners of Barker's Park at that time to put a bus shelter there. The problem is a width one, and it would have to be located on private property, and Council wasn't prepared to do anything other than say, we will use your property, thank you very much. However, the property has changed hands, so there is possibly the opportunity that Council could approach the new owner.
Oh, thank you for that, Councillor Kent, because I mean there are a lot of young tourists who traverse the city and use the bus service to go out to Rainbow and Fairy Springs. and that's not a problem because they go into the facilities. But when they've been over whatever Barker's Park is now, and they're standing in there, I mean, women with babies and all sorts of things standing out in the pouring rain because because the bus still stops at the same place, but there's no shelter. It's crazy. Okay, but you'll sort that out. That's cool. Any more questions of these gentlemen? Because then we'll go to, has anyone got any questions of, Councillor Sree?
Referring to page 53, where we were talking about the fleet earlier on,
Yep.
there is a paragraph under Property and Investments reading, we are undertaking a review of the vehicle fleet, assimilating operations previously handled by Castle Corp and to be consolidated in-house. So total blah, blah. So what does that actually mean? I mean, I know it used in management of the fleet, all the fleet was in Castle Corp's hands. So what's happening now?
So has that been taken out of Rotorua Contracting's gambit, has it, Thomas?
Yes, so in the past, Castle Corp has managed the fleet on behalf of council. So things like organising the servicing, regos, road user charges, as well as vehicle replacements, procuring and disposing. The Chief Executive of Rotorua Contracting has indicated that he would prefer to focus on core business rather than focus on that. So we are looking to bring that in-house and working through the different options with regards to how we do that. The vehicle review itself is looking at the size of our fleet, looking at the kilometres that it travels and making a call as to whether the fleet is of the right size, and then also looking at the composition of the fleet and looking at what we procure based on what's currently available on the market. And just be aware that we do buy via the all of government contracting, which has significant discounts. Unfortunately, I can't comment on the discounts because of confidentiality. But then just looking at whether we what do we buy? So do we buy Toyota Hiluxes versus Ford Rangers versus Mitsubishi Tridents? With regards to our pool vehicles, do we buy Hyundai i35s versus Toyota Corollas and those sorts of things? And just undertake that review. So that's that element of it.
I'd just urge that any recommendation comes back to council or gets put past the sustainability portfolio, because we ought to be looking at a fleet that reflects sustainability, that is fuel efficient and clean and green, and I think that's an option that may not even be in the criteria. But we ought to be walking the talk on sustainability with our fleet, whatever options come in. If we could look at that as a criteria. Thank you.
So just on that, Your Worship, currently I understand the weighting is at about 20% of the weightings take that into account, and so we will have a look at that as well in that process. Yep.
I understand, Monty, you've had huge interaction at the iwi where the candidates have spoken. And has anyone got the latest update on the voting figures? Because I understood they were tracking quite strongly at this stage.
Kia ora, and through you, Mr. Chair and councillors. In terms of the voting, I have seen a figure somewhere around 2,000. Oh, last night's paper. It's around 2,000 currently. I'm uncertain of the percentage of what that voting might be. We're well aware that in terms of the voting, the requirement is that all voters must be registered on the Lakes database so they can vote, and those members who are not there can vote at the time of voting, can register at the time of voting. We're aware, of course, that the closing date is next week, 29th, I think, next Thursday. And from all accounts, it's progressing as we planned.
Well, affiliated Māori, it's not all those that are on the Māori roll.
That's correct. You've got to be registered on the Lakes, Rotorua Lakes register.
Thank you. And just to add, I received mine in the mail and I didn't use the online, and I voted. And the most pleasing thing I want to add is that it's the Te Aroa elections as well for the Lakes Trust, and all the other ones are added to it, so there's the cost saving that's on that particular postal voting.
But I just mention too to councillors that in the time since Monty's picked up the role of kaitiaki Māori, we are traversing many issues that Māori Ora had worked with Hapu on, and Monty's picking those up one by one. And one of the issues that I'd like us to think about, because it takes some planning, is how we are going to mark Māori Ora's passing next year. You know, the year of marking is an issue that I think we need to start to exercise our minds on now, so that we're ready by next year. But Monty's really filled a gap. We didn't realise his footprints were so wide until people came to us to say this was something we had started discussion with Māori Ora, and now we're trying to weave that through the MOU meetings that we're having.
Yes, there are some issues in and around that, but really they're pretty easily managed. And the thing is that the good thing is that I see them, those who are raising those issues often around in the community and other events, tribal events that I'm at. And so in terms of Māori Ora's, whatever they might do at his unveiling next year, plans are already underway. And I'm talking with them as already as to how that might happen. Yes, and we're talking to his son Modi in and around that. So some early discussions are already underway.
It's on there. Yeah, so it's June the 4th, 5th next year will be his first anniversary. The other one was through to Jeff, the CEO. I want to commend the staff here, Mr. Chairman. About 3 weekends ago, they sent a pānui around to all the staff, and they just said they're going to have a day out beside Māori Ora's, what do you call it? It's gravesite. Because many at the tangi, there were so many people there, many didn't get a chance to get down to where it happened. So we went there on a Saturday. I joined them. We went down there, spent a couple of hours, speeches and songs, and then we, at our own expense, we all went for dinner at the Skyline that day. So I want to commend the staff for doing something like that. That went down really well, and they took the family, Māori Ora's boy and daughter, or 2 sons, and shared a day with them, a beautiful Saturday.
So now we move to. Would someone like to move that we go into confidential? Thank you, Councillor Serang. Seconded, Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We'll just take a couple of minutes break. Well, thank you for attending, members of the public.